Hey everybody, this is or very soon will be the Las Vegas Stadium Authority meeting, and they're in the public comments period right now, and I just decided to make absolutely certain that the stream was capiche before I switched over. Now I'm switching over, and here is the Clark County. Here's what you really want to see, which is Clark County, right? So there it is, right there. I'm switching over. Soon you will hear the volume, and I'm going to level this, make sure that it's level. So you haven't missed much, if at all, much of anything. There's level. Okay, cool. Welcome, and here we go.
Or from whatever is available within SB1. So that's my comment. I just want to say thank you and have a good day.
Thank you, Mr. Walden.
Good afternoon. Good evening. My name is Leon Harris, and I'm a member of 872 Labors. I've been a general foreman. I've been a foreman on jobs. And right now I'm currently an instructor for 872 Labors Union. I just want to say my job is to train and send our laborers out to do qualified work. You know, we don't care, what color. We don't have no problem with none of that. We don't care what religion, none of that. We just want to train them to go out and do successful work for our union. I thank Tommy and Archie for allowing me to be an instructor at our union. Because, 872 is a strong union. I've been in other unions in the labors. And, 872 is one of the best unions I ever been in. And I just want to thank you guys and Tommy and Archie for allowing us to do what we do. And that's train qualified people to go out on construction jobs. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harris.
Wow, lots of people.
Good afternoon, Chairman and the rest of the Las Vegas Stadium Authority Board. My name is Sheila Collins, and my statement is going to be based on the historical West Las Vegas and the CBA. Last month, I had an opportunity to get invited to the World Bank and International Monetary Funds. And at that discussion, they talked about human capital, they talked about shared prosperity, and they talked about women entrepreneurship programs. And so I took a deep sigh as I was there, and I was like, wow, they get it. And I want to understand why this board don't get it. Here's my point. I was born and raised in the historical Las Vegas community. Before there was a Sun City McDonald Ranch, before there was a Sun City Summerlin, before there was a Sun City Aliante, I can keep going on. There was the historical West Las Vegas community that I came out of. Now to date,
we'll get back to what she's saying.
There has been 100 plus.
Making some adjustments, folks.
Vegas is still underdeveloped. So I came here today to say that the agenda that you guys is proposing, West Las Vegas, not from a point of conversation, but from a point of action. Basically, what I want to propose is, right now, you guys already understand that due to the technology, the digital transformation of the jobs, that community is going to have some challenges because we're already far behind. So I'm asking and moving forward that you guys establish in the underserved community an infrastructure of innovative technology hubs, women entrepreneurship startups, and investing in the existing businesses there. I propose this saying I'm part of a group which is called Girlfriends Who Inspire Change. I'm the president and founder, and I'm developing it. And it's a social justice movement. And I want you to understand, I've been involved in politics for a very long time, since I was 8 years old. I'm good at this. And I want you to know, as we leave here today, this movement is going to grow. and we're proposing to grow it, that it changes things in this city that is not benefiting us. So I didn't come here to be adversarial. No, I came here to put a suggestion to the board that it's time to change that community today. Thank you.
This is the public comment period, folks. These are public comments.
Hello.
From
my name is Patricia Martinelli Price. I'm also a native Las Vegan, and I was raised on Highland in Washington. My father was full-blooded Sicilian. A lot of people don't understand what that is. He was actually also black. And what I have seen growing up, I now don't live in that community, but very involved with the Ministers Alliance, with the girlfriends and changes that we want to do, that the community still looks the same. And we would like to know, and it is important for all of us to, because when one community doesn't do well, or one person, let's not kid ourselves, nobody else is doing well. So it is important that we look at helping to redevelop that area. The only thing they have is fast food places, which is a McDonald's, a Starbucks. But other than that, that community looks almost exactly the same as when I was raised in that community. So it is important as we move forward, especially with the stadium, to build this, that we don't forget the people in that community. Steve Wynn is extending a branch because he's building that wonderful lagoon with a resort that he's doing now conversations with the communities. Somebody said it's a little bit late. I said, well, some people, it takes them a while. But what I would like to see from this board, and I know Mr. Hill and Tommy, Mr. Taberti, and of course, Mr. Hornbuckle and Mr. Evans and the rest of you, Mr. Epstein, that I know that you care about the community, because when the community does well, we all do well, when every community is in that playing field. But you see the same thing. You have Summerlin, Green Valley, all these wonderful locations, but the west side is the best property from here downtown, but nobody is really paying attention. And it's important. Those people vote. They actually buy food, they buy clothing, they get their hair cut, they buy furniture, they buy cars. So I feel it is
Hey folks,
time
just to
that
let
we
you know,
need to
this
help,
is the public comment period,
to have a business or help
and
to develop
there are a number of speakers. They only get one chance to
and I
speak,
know
okay?
that you're all fair and honorable people. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. Hello.
And look at the line. See that line?
My name is Rosemary Phillips, and just as the prior speaker said, there's been over 100 community and builders that has been developed in Las Vegas, and the west side has been left out. I wanted to take just a minute to read off a list of the community that has went up around the west side community. We have the Mountain Edge, Beacon Hill, Southern Highland, Rio Vista, Tenere Ridge, Riverdale, Sun Anthem, Encore, Legacy, Desert Willow, Arlington Hill, Highland Ranch, Bridlewood, River Grove, Cora Creek, Altamara, Centennial Hill, Elkhorn Ranch, Long Mountain, Las Vegas Country Club, Shadow Hill, Lynn Brooks, Silverstone, South Shore, Spring Mountain, Tucson Trail, Sun City, Summerlin, El Dorado Hill, Rancho del Norte, Coyote Spring, Calico Ridge, Seven Hills, Monticello, McDonald Highland, Rose Ranch, Spanish Trail, Spring Valley, Town Center, Summerlin, McNeil, Rancho del Air, Spanish Oak, Spanish Trail, Desert End Country, Sundance Club. I only read a third of the community that has went up. And from this, you can see it's obvious that the West Side community has been left behind. So we need to stop the abusing and leaving out of the West Side community. So what I would have to say is, for the record, we would like to kneel.
One thing I would like to bring out, I live on the historical West Side. It is the historical West Side.
Ma'am, can I ask you to introduce yourself?
Oh, my name is Gabrielle Yates. I represent GWIC. And I want to talk about the historical West Side. I'm a historian. And the historical West Side is the original Las Vegas, built in 1905 by not Clark County, but originally from John T. McWilliams, who was a Canadian surveyor. It was called Lincoln County, named after Abraham Lincoln because he needed one electoral vote. But I'm going to talk about what's going on at the Moulin Rouge. The Moulin Rouge has been torn down. They haven't sent any notices. No 1401B is not is a notification that is supposed to be sent out when a company or contractor does work to the residents within a 10-day. Now, I went back to EPA, and EPA says there's nothing that they can do, but air quality control could do something. And what they're supposed to do is notify the residents, which wasn't notified. And although the fire took place on October the 5th, and that fire that took place, the firemen just let it burn. And it was residents that were living on the back street of McWilliams and Gerson, and they all said they had smoke and smoke insulation, and that fire went all the way up to MLK and Washington. Also, there's asbestos in that area, and under CFR 41M, nothing has been done. No air quality, no air control, nothing. Nobody has come out. So not only, the city wants to blame the prior owner, but I just want to blame somebody owner, because let's look at it this way. If that's your mother, if that's your father, if that's your grandmother, if that's your niece, if that's your sister, if that's your brother, then why do we continue to treat us like we don't exist? And asbestos is still going on, and y'all still knocking things down. Y'all talk about a 10-day notice. Well, who did you give a 10-day notice to that you forget about a whole neighborhood? I want something done immediately, because it's a blight to not only to you, but it's a blight to us that live back there. I live on Gerson, but McWilliams is affected. H is affected. There's a school over there. There's school children over there. What if it was your children? What would you want to be done? The same thing that you want to be done is the same thing that I want to be done as well. I'm not asking nothing, but I just do want to let you know, I have people praying from all the way from Alabama and across this country that y'all took an oath to do what's right, and I just pray that you continue to do what's right.
Thank you.
And I want to end and say thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Wow, that's powerful. Ooh. Let's see if the media comes.
Good afternoon. My name is Robert Coles. I'm a Legionnaire veteran and the bar manager, facilities manager for American Legion Post 8, located on Veterans Memorial Drive. Ms. Glenn Singh will be speaking on behalf of us, but on behalf of the American Legion and our post, we want to thank you for your support and continued support for our veterans and for our post. Thank you.
Henry Baker. I would also like to thank you as a member of the Sons of the American Legion, Post 8.
Good afternoon. My name is Glenna Cecily. My title is the National Executive Committee Woman for the Department of Nevada, and I'm here on behalf of the entire Post 8 family. The American Legion and the American Legion family consists of active duty military, veterans, their spouses, their female descendants, and the Sons of the American Legion is all of their male descendants. Nationally, we are 4.4 million people strong. One of the reasons why I'm here today is to thank not only this board, but Labor Laws Local 872 and the Las Vegas Raiders. During our recent windstorm, we had a sign that was approximately 40 years old on the corner of Bonanza and Veterans Memorial Drive. And during a very strong windstorm, as a lot of you are aware, Vegas has some very strong windstorms, our sign was destroyed. It came down in just different sections, and it was 40 years old. It was old. It was due to be replaced, and we had talked about the possibility of doing that. And the windstorm kind of sped up that process a lot. Well, Local 872 actually came in and said, well, we noticed that your sign's gone, and we'd be actually willing to assist. Now, that assistance actually wound up helping to save the Legion family anywhere. We wound up with about 4 different bids, anywhere from about $1,000 all the way up to $3,000. That money we can actually use to benefit our local community, our active duty military here in Las Vegas. the kids of our active duty military. It's a strong hardship for the children when one of their parents is deployed. A lot of our programs are related around children. So the money that we raise goes towards those children. So because of Laborers Local 872, we were actually able to save that money as a family and as a group to be able to be used towards our other community programs. So that being said, I would like to thank publicly Laborers Local 872 and the Las Vegas Raiders, because they helped assist to pay for the sign, so that our donations and that our fundraising actually is going towards what our programs are all about: community, state, nation, active duty military, the veterans of the Las Vegas community, and all our families. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Tim Brooks. I'm with Amazon Masonry. I'm here to speak about the stadium. I'm in support of the community agreement as it stands. I've been already working with Mortensen and McCarthy on the job already. I've already got checks from them. I've been a part of their pre-bid process, their budgeting process. I've been to, our company's been proactive and been at every situation out there, whether it's at the Orleans, and finding a contractor to the bid network to try to assist them to meet their diversity goals or any way that we can. We are an unlimited A, B licensed contractor in the state of Nevada. So, I'm in support to say that, with some effort, the system is working. It's doing what it's supposed to do. But, nothing's a handout. You have to go out there and get it. You have to figure out who's getting the jobs and who's being awarded. I know TAB and MCON has got the first box cover job, and the first thing I did was call TAB and MCON and go after the trucking for that business. So, what I'm saying is that, I appreciate the opportunities that this thing is going to bring for me and my family and my employees, and I think the system's going to work. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rex.
Hi, my name is Yolanda Diaz. And I'm standing up here. The reason that everyone is giving 872 kudos. And the truth has to be told. So I guess you get a couple of minutes here, but this is where I get to do some healing of my own. March of 2006, I joined as a laborer of local.
Chairman Hill, I'm going to call for a point of order.
And then, but you want the kudos when everyone is saying how good the laborers union is.
Could I just ask you to pause for a minute, ma'am?
Excuse me?
Could I ask you to pause for a minute, please?
I didn't hear you.
Could you pause for a minute, please? Thank you. Mr. White?
Oh, could you pause for a minute? Yolanda Diaz has taken the mic to badger my reputation. That's not on the agenda. So if she would like to badger my reputation, I suggest she puts it on the agenda.
I didn't mention his name, so I will continue. I said Local 872.
Ma'am, just a second. I'd just like to ask our attorney to weigh in on this.
Don't get discriminated against.
As you announced at the beginning, this section for public comment under the open meeting law is reserved solely for items on the agenda, and it appears her comments would be better heard at the end of the agenda.
Okay, this is public. And the other two guys just came up here and did a whole spiel about 872, and the other guy came up here and did a whole spiel about 872.
That's bad.
So I'm going to stand here and do a spiel about 872. So
yeah, that's bad. They shouldn't be doing that. They shouldn't have shut down the system because they don't want bad news. See how they are?
I'm just saying that 872 do not treat African American men and women fair in the laborers union. Now, so this is my story, and you don't know my story. So you can't elaborate on my experience and on Stephanie Shelby's experience when our skills were deleted. And she went up there to ask about her skills after being in the union for 10 years. Her credits are missing. And she ended up getting handcuffed in front of the union hall after they called the police on her after they kidnapped her in the building because they wouldn't let her out. Somebody called the police on her and they handcuffed her. Stephanie, can you stand up? And they handcuffed her in front of the building. And this is the true story. She won her hearing in NLRB, National Labor Relations Board, court. They reversed it over in Washington. They were supposed to do a settlement with her. She's been disabled ever since. And she didn't deserve what happened to her. Not only that, they covered up the entire, her entire life is destroyed. And there's another gentleman who, he isn't here today, and he can tell his own story. But I'm just saying, people up here and giving kudos to the laborers, and you don't know the laborers like I know the laborers. This is my experience. I'm telling the truth, and nobody's going to stop me from telling the truth. I'm not hurting anyone. I'm not calling out anyone other than what real reality is. And I'll be back for the rest of my story. I want to tell Stephanie's story because she's disabled.
Wow.
Thank you. Okay, we've heard both sides of that. I would like to get things related to agenda items for the rest of the initial public comment.
That's an agenda item, Steve.
That you wish to raise.
Whoa.
We'll do that at the end of the meeting.
That has everything to do with community benefits.
Chairman.
That's an agenda item.
My name is Gene Collins, I reside at 1411 Virginia City Avenue. Now, I'm appreciative of what you said about holding other comments to the end if it's not pertaining to where we're here, to the end of the thing. And I might say something to Mr. White. I would remain silent if I was you about what's going on here. That's all I'm going to say. Now, Mr. Chairman, what I have here, I have two documents in my hand. This is the community benefit plan that the Raiders is going to distribute, I guess, to the community. What I have here is the African American Workers Union plan. Now, in this one, I don't see anything in here that pertains to the historical African Americans and North Las Vegas corridor. This what I doesn't see in this plan. Now, I rise to speak. Some of you haven't been here as long as I have. Some of you haven't been here when we couldn't go up under Bonanza Underpass. Some of you have not been here when the schools were separate. Some of you have not been here when we couldn't go on Main Street. And so now, you put together a document. This is the first time that I'm seeing this document. And what I'd appreciate it, that you pull this document, and we've been trying to find out. Matter of fact, we've been waiting, Mr. Chairman, until this document is produced so that we could go over and see how the African American historical West Side and North Las Vegas community fits into what the Raiders was doing. It's not in here. Now you can see the difference between this and this. Now, and I'm not going to badmouth those speakers who have gotten here, who have gotten up. But you see, the plan that the Raiders is going to produce, supposed to include the communities, is no comparison, Mr. Chairman, to what we are going to look like if this thing passes. There's nothing in here. And I just went through this a few moments ago. There's nothing in here, Mr. Chairman. So it does not make good business sense for you all to pass something that we have worked hard for all of our entire life, and we are going to be... I need another minute, Mr. Chairman, if I may.
I'm sorry, Mr. Collins. We're going to have to be a little stricter today. So you're certainly willing to accept the documentation you have and can talk further.
Well, I want to come back because there's some things in here, Mr. Chairman, that I want everybody to understand that business as usual, Mr. Chairman, is no longer. We can't no longer continue to work, continue to die, continue to shed our bloods in the streets, and then you come up with a document such as this, who's supposed to represent us, and there's nothing looks like this. So what do you think is going to happen to us? And I want to thank you, and I'll be back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for giving me the extra time.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. Good afternoon.
That's bad stuff, man.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is John Ponder. I'm the founder and the CEO of an organization called Hope for Prisoners that works with men, women, and young adults that are coming out of different arenas of the judicial system. And I just wanted to come today to just voice my tremendous gratitude to the Las Vegas Raiders and what their coming here is going to mean to our community and specifically to the men and women who are coming home from the prison system to help them to find sustainable employment. We are actively involved in a collaboration with Workforce Connection, the College of Southern Nevada, and Local 872 for an apprenticeship program that's going to be working inside Nevada Department of Corrections so that we can prepare men and women to earn a sustainable wage once they get released. So I'm very grateful to that opportunity, and thank you.
Mr. Guzman.
Peter Guzman, President of the Latin Chamber of Commerce, and I'm only going to speak on my experience. I want to thank John Ponder. I'm a board member of Hope for Prisoners, and the apprenticeship programs and the Raiders and the collaborations are really going to change lives and already beginning to. I want to specifically talk about the Latin Chamber of Commerce and our interaction with the Raiders and with the gentlemen that are sitting here, including Dave, the attorney.
Mr. Guzman, can I ask if this is related to an agenda item today?
It is,
okay.
Yeah. So, Community Benefits Plan, that's on the agenda, correct?
Yes.
So, I've worked really hard with them. My calls have been answered. We've had meetings. We've had sit-downs. It's been one responsive moment after another with them. So my experience with the Raiders has been tremendous, continues to be tremendous, and I think the document, unless something changed really quick, what they're going to present could be the most aggressive historical percentages-wise in the NFL's history. And so I'm hoping that we hear that because I believe that it's extremely aggressive.
That's a complete joke. Oakland, we had 25% participation.
Morton and McCarthy.
They're looking at 15%.
They've met with members from our chamber. I believe it's going to lead to real opportunities. And so my experience, the Latin Chamber of Commerce experience with the Raiders has been tremendous.
Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Roy Daly of R&M Trucking, and my question to you guys is, I'm on the vendors list, and I have a trucking company, and I'm ready to go. When am I going to receive a phone call for work?
Sir, this is not a time for question and answers, and we're not.
Okay, well, I'm on the vendors list. I qualify SBE. I have dump trucks. I have employees. I'm ready to go. I haven't received a call.
Because they're not ready to go.
We
That's
can put
why.
you in touch with the right people to talk to. Thank you. Welcome.
Good afternoon. My name is Leo Garcia. I'm here to represent the veteran community. What qualifies me to do this is I'm a United States Air Force veteran, a veteran of Desert Shield, Desert Storm. I'm actively involved in Concerned Veterans for America, Welcome Home Troops, Emerging Vets and Players, Vets Helping Vets, the American Legion and VFW, and multiple VSOs across the nation. Active duty military members, before being honorably discharged from the military, were accountable for $1 million projects, equipment, while in uniform. They've been trained for hours and years to perfect our special skills in the military. We have thousands of active duty military members transitioning into civilian lives that are looking for jobs and to relocate to our wonderful city. This 1% of men and women signed a blank check to protect and fight for our freedom. I feel that my fellow brothers and sisters are fully qualified for the job to perform the task of being trained and accountable for building this beautiful stadium for our city of Las Vegas. I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Garcia. Sir?
Once again, my name is Robert Coles from the American Legion Post 8. I just wanted to make the statement that the American Legion and Post 8 is in full support of the Community Benefits Plan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sir? Mr. Chairman, Pastor Seals, West Las Vegas. I rise to speak to the bargaining agreement that was supposed to have been discussed, and I don't see it on the agenda, so I'm asking about that agreement. Is it going to be discussed today or not?
Are you referring to the community benefit
Yes,
plan?
sir.
Yes, it will be discussed. It is on the agenda.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Any other member of the public wish to make comment? Okay, seeing none. I recognize this guy.
I apologize.
Mr. Chairman.
In the House. For the record, my name is Steve Sisolak. I'm currently the chair of the Clark County Commission. I'm speaking today on my behalf. 40 days ago, we experienced one of the darkest days in Las Vegas history. Excuse me. I got a call late that Sunday night, from Sheriff Lombardo and told me about the situation. And he told me we had a couple dead and a couple dozen wounded. And I got in the car, and let me tell you, the first call that I got on the way down to Metro was from the MGM and offered to do anything they could possibly do. The second call, when I needed a place to collect blood, was from Tommy White, Labor's 872, who opened up their facilities for us to collect blood. The third call I got was from Mr. Mark Bedane, who said, "How can I help?" He sent us $50,000 to help the people that were affected by that tragedy. The NFL matched that $50,000 to help the victims of 1 October. That, to me, is what a community benefit, a community partnership is really all about. It's reaching out to others when they need help the most. I was asked to give the eulogy at the security guard that was killed at the 1 October event. Mr. White provided an interpreter because I couldn't speak Spanish, and the family was Spanish. They asked me to give the eulogy. I did it. Marco Hernandez served as my interpreter. That's what community partners do for each other. That's what real community benefit is. We stick together in the worst of times and the toughest of times, and we help each other out. This community came together like nothing has ever happened before as a result of that incident. We need to maintain that attitude that happened. Everybody reached out, whether they donated blood, they donated money, they donated water. A lady donated a platter of cookies and said, "This is all I can afford to do." And I said, those cookies mean a lot to the first responders that eat those cookies, the fact that you made them with your hands. That's what a community does. That's what partners do. That's what the benefit of being community partners is. I thank each of you. I thank the MGM for what you did, continue to do. I thank Local 872 for what you do, continue to do. And I thank the Raiders for what they did, and they stood up. And then 2 weeks later, they stood up and did the same thing in Northern California with the fires that they had up there, because that's what a community partner does. We're lucky to have good partners in this community, and they're good partners. So I've got our Vegas Strong T-shirts, which we've given out thousands of these T-shirts to people representing exactly how we feel in Las Vegas. So I'm going to ask Jeremy to hand them out to each of you. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. It's a pleasure. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Chairman Sisolak. I'd just like to say that we all appreciate the leadership that you showed throughout that entire ordeal. You were there on a very consistent basis, and we all appreciate that. We needed it. Thank you. Okay, we will close agenda item 2, open agenda item 3, which is the approval of the agenda. If the board has any recommendations for changes, either additions or deletions, I'd entertain that. And if not, I'd entertain a motion to it.
The Brown Act only works in California. That's the state of Nevada, just letting you know.
We have a motion. We have a second.
I'll second the motion.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you. Open agenda item 4. I'll just make a few comments. We are still working to be done by February with the documentation that will allow the stadium project to move forward. Certainly want to thank everyone who has been working on this. It's been quite a number of people. Certainly the Raiders team and their staff, Jeremy, Mr. Arnold, and all of our staff as well. Clark County has been doing quite a bit of work, no question about that. So I appreciate all of that. There's been good progress made on the long list of documents that are needed in order to bring this project, well, at least the documentation part to a conclusion and the project to a start. We look forward to having that wrapped up in the next 3 months or so. in order to make sure that all of the documentations, which we have done on all documents we're doing today with a community benefit plan, that we do not present a document for the first time to the board and ask the board to act in any way on that document. So in order to be completed by February, we're going to need to present all of the documents to the board prior to that February meeting. In order to make sure that we can get that done, or at least help make sure that we can get that done, we have scheduled an additional meeting in January, tentatively for January 25th. I would anticipate there's a pretty high probability that we're going to need that meeting. It's just we've got a number of documents, some of them fairly lengthy, that need to be presented. Really think it's important that the board have some time between when those documents are first presented until they're asked to act. So I would strongly urge you to more than pencil the January 25th meeting into your calendar. That'll be in addition to the regularly scheduled meeting on January 11th. Over the last week or so, there's been some articles written. I think probably all of you are aware that in the recent tax reform plan that was put forward in D.C., that there was a provision in that proposal that would almost undoubtedly cause the bonds that would be issued by Clark County for the stadium to be taxable rather than tax exempt. And I just wanted to talk through that a little bit. Jeremy will have an opportunity to fill in or correct me as he has his report, and I'll ask him to do that if necessary. But I wanted to just talk through that a little bit to give the board a sense of what the ramification for that would be. And really the starting point for this is in going through the bond process is determining the revenue that's available and, frankly, the type of revenue that is available. We are obviously financing the public portion with a room tax allocation of 0.88%. I'm going to use some round numbers so that it just makes it easier to both think about and talk about. But let's say that 0.88% room tax would generate $50 million a year. It's relatively close to what we project in the first year. And when I say it matters the type of revenue, the reliability and consistency of the revenue source matters in what the ultimate interest rate is going to be charged on the bonds. That's set by the market, but we have obviously a revenue source that has been in place for a long time. That makes it easier to model. It makes it, particularly when it has been relatively consistent over the years, makes it easier to predict. That helps keep interest rates somewhat lower.
You're underfunded.
The recommendation that was made by the Tourism Infrastructure Committee and the law that was ultimately passed requires that there be a 1.5 times coverage ratio
which isn't there
in this bond process. So what that means is the projected revenue, the $50 million in the first year, and that will grow somewhat over time, must be projected to be at least 50% more than is needed to pay the bonds. So if we use that $50 million number, we could use $33.3 million of that revenue to make a bond payment. But we could not use more than that to make a bond payment. We are structuring the bonding process kind of similar to how someone would buy a house. We are going to make a down payment, and in bond lingo, we call that PAYGO. So we are as you know, collecting money. We'll get a report on how much funding has already been generated by the room tax. But basically what we are doing is saving up some money in the early stages here in order to
talk
make
about
a
the
down
deficit
payment
for the 2 months.
on that $750 million commitment for the bonding. So assume that turns out to be in the $50 million range. We won't actually be looking to bond $750 million. We'll be looking to bond something that is closer to $700 million by the time we get to April. Currently, if given today's interest rate and given the fact that the proposal in the tax reform bill has not passed, if we looked at whether or not we would have enough revenue to make bond payments that would support bonding in that $700 million range, the answer to that would be yes. And in fact, the answer to that would be we could afford to bond more than $700 million. What we don't know is exactly what the interest rate environment will be approximately 6 months from now when bonds are issued. And we don't know whether this tax reform proposal will pass, and if it does pass, whether the provision in that bill that would make the stadium bonds taxable would pass as a part of that bill. The current interest rate spread between a tax-exempt bond and a taxable bond is slightly less than 0.5%. So that would be the interest rate impact of the shift from tax-exempt to taxable.
You lie!
Additional 0.5% round number would cost us approximately $3 million each year. That is money that
he's not telling the truth for this reason, because Clark County would not be the backer. And because Clark County isn't the backer, it has to be another revenue stream like the stadium, and that would push the interest rate really sky high. So he is completely lying or wrong or doesn't know what he's talking about. Forget it.
Pay for the operations of the stadium authority, the buildup of an additional portion of the debt service reserve. It would help pay to compensate UNLV for the costs associated with closing Sam Boyd Stadium, and the remaining amount would be used either for maintenance or for potentially early repayment of the bond itself. So going back to those round number examples, if we're going to collect $50 million a year, and it requires $30 million in our current situation to make the bond payment on a $700 million bond, we would have $20 million left over that would be put in the waterfall for those uses outlined in the law and outlined in the recommendation from the tourism infrastructure.
Sham.
If the bonds were taxable rather than tax exempt, that roughly $3 million a year cost, and that could move around a little bit between now and April, but it's going to be directionally correct, would have to be used or would not be available for use in the waterfall. So the expense for the stadium authority
tell them why,
in this process would be there. That would not necessarily mean that there was not enough revenue to fully fund $700 million in bonding. And I'm using round numbers. I don't want to get anybody to the point where they feel like those are exact numbers, because those numbers are going to move around between now and April. In the model that we had put together before and that we continue to use, and I believe that the bond counsel and bond consultants that the county has employed for this project, there is a projected increase in the interest rate between now and April of 0.5% or approximately 0.5%. That may or may not take place. So when I say we currently have enough money enough revenue to support more than $700 million in bonds. That would include a projected rate increase that is separate and apart from any rate increase that would be included in a tax reform bill. That is already built into that model. So that may or may not provide some cushion. In the event that the revenue is not enough to support $700 million in bonding, given the current model that's in place, if rates rise higher than we had anticipated, there are, we'll start with, the amount that it would fall below $750 million is potentially meaningful, but not
tell the truth,
an obstacle that could not be overcome.
No, yeah, right. Tell the
it
truth.
Could be in the plus or minus $20 or $25 million range below that $750 million total amount. There are certainly potentially ways in which the county, in working with the Raiders and Stadium Authority and their consultants, could look to close that gap. And I'll give you an example that I don't know if that has been discussed, but it is at least theoretically possible. And there may be pros and cons, and probably are pros and cons, to any steps that may be taken in order to close that gap. But, for example, instead of the current model, which would issue all of that bonding at the beginning of the project in April, it's certainly possible to split that into two tranches, postpone a portion of the financing for some period of time. That would allow more revenue to be generated by the sales tax that could potentially be used as part of that pay-go or down payment. And I'm sure there are other methods for addressing that discrepancy. Regardless, there is an expense if the tax bill would pass with the current language related to the tax-exempt or taxable portion of stadium bonds to the Stadium Authority. That $3 plus or minus $1 million would be an expense to us either way. So it is, it's a meaningful amount of money. It is, frankly, I don't think enough to jeopardize the project moving forward, but it is something that we'll need to continue to keep our eye on. We'll certainly ask the county, and I know they will, without us asking, frankly, to look at that as well and to look at what the alternatives may be if that bill were to pass in its current form. So I'll just postpone questions on that until Jeremy has a chance to clean up anything that I said that he may think needs cleaned up. But I just wanted to address that a little bit since it's been kind of front and center lately. Are there any comments that any of the members of the board would like to make at this point? Okay. We'll close agenda item 4, open agenda item 5, which is the
also, remember I said $29 million loss? Their estimate's a little bit lower. He didn't say, he didn't use the term annual. He made it sound like it was just, one time. That's an annual difference.
I'd make a motion for approval.
Is there a second? Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Hello, Ms. Jones-Blackhurst. Thank you. So that passes unanimously. We'll close agenda item 5, open agenda item 6, and turn it over to my cleanup batter, Mr. Aguero.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Jeremy Aguero. I have no additional comments on that particular issue. I think you nailed it, sir. With regard to the status update relative to administrative items and the operations of the Stadium Authority, I'll just go through a few of them. I'm trying to make my comments relatively brief. We feel like we've made a substantial amount of progress on all the project documents. Mr. Chairman already extended thanks to everyone involved. I won't repeat that. There's certainly been a great deal of work by a great number of people, and we are very thankful to all involved. There are two documents that you have on your agenda today. One is the enabling work agreement. Mr. Arnold will be going through that with you here shortly. The second is the community benefit plan, which I will be walking through a little bit later in your agenda. We have also completed, or we think is very near complete, the land dedication agreement, which is essentially the agreement that allows for the transfer of the property that's been acquired by the Raiders for the stadium development to be transferred to the public. That has gone back and forth through a number of the attorneys, including the folks at Brownstein, Hyatt, Farber, Schreck, which are in the audience and have worked diligently on that, as well as the Raiders attorneys, so we're thankful that has made progress. The UNLV joint use agreement continues to make progress. The lawyers are working through the legal issues on both sides, and we look forward to circling back on that early next week. The transaction and financing agreements, we've been working with the county and the county's financial advisors relative to that agreement. They have submitted, as of earlier this week, preliminary drafts of both the MOU between the county and the Stadium Authority, as well as a structure for the document between the Stadium Authority Board and the Raiders. So we will turn our attention to that. Finally, and arguably as important as any document that we'll speak about, is the development agreement. Mr. Arnold has been working with Mr. Gilbert, who's an attorney working with the Raiders, and continue to work through that. Our expectation is that we will have a revised turn or a new draft of that as early as next week, and we'll continue to work diligently through that. There are a number of other documents, as you're all aware. There's about 30 of them that we're continuing to work through, but the last 2 months, we've seen serious progress on many of those fronts, and so we're very pleased about that. Mr. Chairman, relative to the budget, overall, within your packet is information relative to our budget and our progress thus far. There's a document that is on 11 by 17 paper. It looks like this one. We'll apologize for the small font. We didn't have any paper bigger than 11 by 17. Nonetheless, what this indicates is that we are on track and on budget for the pre-bonding period. Again, the pre-bonding period reflects the period prior to when bonds are issued. The Stadium Authority Board is granted.
They have 2 months of deficits he's not talking about. That spells cover up to me. I'm sorry. It's right there in black and white. That's bullshit. Wow.
Today, August, we've seen collection of about $25 million
in September,
worth of room tax revenue, including the interest that earned. We've incurred about $700,000 worth of expenses, leaving just under $300,000 remaining in terms of our budget. The unallocated portion of the Stadium Authority's budget is roughly $113,000 that remains unallocated as of August, when this summary was provided. We are on track and on budget as of right now. Certainly, depending on the timeline, things are going to get a bit tight, but nonetheless, we are dedicated to the proposition of getting through this primary period. So, Mr. Chairman, I've gone through 3 issues. If you'd like me to pause, I'm more than happy to do that, whatever's appropriate.
Any questions, Mr. Aguero?
Tongue in cheek.
I'd just point out that our staying on budget method involves not paying our consultant staff and lawyers. But,
yeah.
We appreciate that.
It's a creative plan, Mr. Chairman. With regard to some other things, the website that's come up, it's been part of the public comment here relative to the number of vendors that have registered. I'm pleased to say that as of today, we've had 440 vendors register. 270 of them identified themselves as small business. We continue to work to send those directly to Mortensen and McCarthy and to direct folks to their project website to ensure that people have interest in the project are directed to where folks can help them on that. The revenue collection update, August was a softer month than we've seen previously. $3.7 million was collected in room tax in August for the Stadium Authority, or for the Stadium project. That's 1.9% under budget projections, although I'm pleased to say that the September numbers appear to be right back on track with projections, looking like they'll come in at roughly $4.1 million, what was projected. There were a couple of reasons for the August shortfall.
It has shortfall for September, too.
Quite frankly, a prior year comparison, which was very strong. August of 2016 was the best August on record for Southern Nevada, and there were also fewer rooms available due to some closures and temporary room reductions as a result of renovations in several projects, which reduced room revenue. Nonetheless, average daily room rate was up 2.8%. RevPAR, revenue per available room, was up 2%. We continue to believe we're on track relative to our revenue projections, if not slightly ahead of it, Mr. Chairman.
Can I just ask Jeremy, all of that was about a 1.7%, being off 1.7% in August?
1.9% in August. We remain
September
up,
too.
Through the fiscal year and up through the projection period by a significant margin.
So I believe we're on the current pace. We're projected to be approximately $3 million.
He lied about September. September is in a deficit too. It's right there on the chart, folks.
Yes, sir. I think that's probably true. I think we're keeping a very close eye on the revenues for October, November, and December. We do believe that we can expect some softness in those months, and I want to be very cautious about any expectation that we won't work our way through some of that overage over the next couple of months.
Okay, thanks.
With that, Mr. Chairman, we will continue to move forward on all fronts. There's a few other things that we will talk about as we go through your agenda. We have worked with the county on a quarterly economic update. I will refer to that when we get to that specific agenda item. We also worked to get worked as the board directed us to in terms of identifying a pre-construction development consultant. I look forward to introducing those folks to the Stadium Authority Board when we get to that item. With that, Mr. Chairman, that's our status report for what we've done over the past couple of months.
Any questions from the board? Mr. Evans?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one question for Mr. McGrail. Regarding the vendor interest forms, one of the things I thought about is we're concerned about making sure that there's participation during pre-development, construction, and ongoing operations. Do those forms have a check mark or something like that where the submitter can indicate which phase that they're interested in at this time?
No. For the record, Jeremy Aguero, the answer is no, because to be honest with you, I don't know that we sort of knew what all those pieces and parts were going to be. Frankly, pre-development could have transportation. Jeremy Aguero, for the record. Agenda item number 7 is similar to the one that you saw a quarter ago. We are requesting that the Stadium Authority authorize the Clark County Department of Finance to submit the Stadium Authority quarterly economic survey report to the State of Nevada Department of Taxation pursuant to NRS 354.6015 and NAC 354.559. This is essentially an economic survey that determines the relative health of the economy and what is potentially affecting local governments, including the Stadium Authority Board. Most of the responses in that are listed as NA because they simply do not apply. There are 2 questions in which we have provided responses, or the good people at the county have assisted us in providing responses. That is question 2 regarding assessed land value growth in excess of 10% over the past 2 years. That has occurred in Clark County. We are just mirroring what Clark County reports. And then numbers 14 and 15, which list the general fund and cash balances for the Stadium Authority itself, consistent with the budget that I provided you earlier in the documentation on the budget that's included in your packet. With that, Mr. Chairman, we would seek to have approval of that document so it can be properly submitted.
Board, have any questions for Jeremy? And if not, I'd entertain a motion to approve. A motion, do we have a second?
I'll second the motion.
A motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Passes unanimously. Thank you. Agenda item 8. I'd like to welcome Mr. Benaim, Mr. Ventrelli, Ms. Linjon. Welcome.
Keep my remarks brief. The project team has made good progress on the stadium project. We're proceeding towards 100% GMP on schedule, so we'll hit that in the first quarter of 18. You've probably seen some preliminary work being done on the site, but we will have an official groundbreaking on Monday and hopefully start putting everybody to work. Chairman Hill and I will be leaving on Tuesday to go to Houston to bid FIFA for the World Cup 2026. So we made it through round one, and so we're going there to round two. I see Mr. Arnold smiling because we're going to his hometown, and he's probably still basking his World Series title with his Houston Astros tie, but we'll be happy to be in your town. But we continue to look for other events. Obviously, we're focused on this as a football home for the Raiders, but we know the impact of the other events that are going to bring here, so FIFA would be a huge win for us. We've had productive dialogue with the NFL. We had meetings a few weeks ago, and they've laid out the process for the NFL draft as well as for future NFL Super Bowls. And I will just tell you that we got very positive feedback about both the draft to be awarded for either 2019 or 2020. And we have a meeting in about 3 weeks in Dallas to make a presentation for Las Vegas to be the host for one of those drafts. And the Super Bowl would be for either 2024 or 2025. So we're proceeding to try and get the Super Bowl for the market as well.
Okay. You said 2019 or 2020?
Thank you, Mr. Benaim. Appreciate it.
Wait. He said 2019 or 2020 for the draft? So he wants to get the draft in Las Vegas before the stadium is open.
I've got a number of them.
Huh.
Okay, we'll close agenda item 8, open agenda item 9.
But not for Oakland, which has a storied football history, right? Wow.
Mr. Chairman, for the record, Jeremy Aguero. Agenda item number 9 and the 9th tab in your board packets is discussion and possible approval of a professional services agreement in the amount not to exceed $50,000 with Grand Canyon Development Partners to provide pre-development agreement, general construction, and development advisory services to the Stadium Authority Board. This is an item for potential action. We had the opportunity to meet with the folks from Grand Canyon Development Partners and talk to them relative to what type of services they could ultimately provide in terms of helping us understand the development process and evaluating it from the Stadium Authority Board standpoint. Staff received 11 initial proposals from interested parties. We conducted follow-up interviews with 6 candidates. I do want to extend my thanks to Mr. Taberti, who sat through all of those interviews and was remarkably helpful throughout that process. So thank you, sir. I appreciate that. The Grand Canyon Development Partners team was stellar both in application and in interview. They include Tony Constantino, Sam Nicholson, and Jack Boyle. As a group, they have designed and developed, have both, design and development experience, I should say, with a wide variety of construction projects, not only here in Southern Nevada, but across the United States. These include multiple NFL stadiums, the NHL arena in Phoenix, and other large-scale projects, including work on City Center as well as Cosmopolitan. Mr. Constantino has 4 decades of experience in the construction industry in a variety of roles, including overseeing construction of the Phoenix Coyotes arena and acting as the team's vice president of arena development. Mr. Nicholson also has a long resume, which I'm not doing justice of to any of them here. So, gentlemen, I do apologize for that. Worked on notable projects, including the Cosmo here, as well as the Phoenix Coyotes Arena. And Mr. Boyle, also extensive experience in sports stadiums and arena architecture during his many years with preeminent sports architecture firm HOK Populous. He designed and implemented plans for numerous professional sports venues, not the least of which are University of Phoenix Stadium, Gillette Stadium, and the Cleveland Browns Stadium. We had the opportunity to meet these gentlemen. They are here today in case the board has any questions or would like more information in terms of what we've asked them to do or what their expertise is. But again, I'm thankful for their willingness to assist us with this project, for the board's assistance in bringing this forward. And if there's any questions, we'd be more than happy to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Guerrero, and thanks for the work that you did on this. I also want to thank Mr. Taberti for lending his expertise to the process and his diligence in that. It's really helpful. Thanks to you. Gentlemen, welcome. If you'd like an opportunity to say a few words, that'd be great.
Actually, my name is Sam Nicholson. I'm the president of Grand Canyon Development Partners, and Mr. Costantino here is the project executive that we have designated for the potential services that we provide to you. So, Mr. Chairman and members of the board, thank you for the opportunity. We're simply here to answer any questions that you may have.
Does the board have any questions for Grand Canyon? Sorry to disappoint you, but
Mr. Chair, I can't help myself.
Mr. Hornbuckle.
But maybe just one, and maybe it's to all of us. I don't even know who to direct the question to. The reporting back to this board, in what format and how? Mr. Chairman, for the record, this is Jeremy Aguero, and I'll certainly defer to the gentlemen that are behind me. We've asked them to be prepared to provide ad hoc development responses to a number of questions. You'll recall that we previously provided a list of development considerations. We'd like them to go through the exercise of evaluating that. There's the development process and all of the documents that are being prepared that are extensive. The county's done a wonderful job. Our intent is not to in any way interfere with that process, but the Stadium Authority Board is going to need to understand all of those documents and be able to have folks that will respond to that as well. In addition to that, as we receive responses back from the development documents that are included, including the specifications for the stadium itself, having folks that have expertise in having built them, and what we've asked is for the creation of a matrix so we can compare what is being proposed on this project versus other projects to evaluate and make sure essentially that the board is comfortable that it meets the premier first-class standard that is set forth in Senate Bill 1. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Evans?
Yes. I had one question. I had a meeting with one of our local utility agencies, and they were concerned about the development process and just making sure some of the design things are done. So I would assume, or I guess my question would be, if I'm approached in cases like that, would you represent us, or could I call upon your agency to either attend that type of meeting or accompany me to that type of discussion?
I'll answer that question. Absolutely. We're here to help in any fashion that we can related to the development process. Not to interfere, certainly, but just to make sure that this process, you're aware of everything that's going on, the process runs smoothly.
Okay, thank you. No other questions? Okay, thank you, gentlemen. We appreciate you being here. If there are no other questions, I'd entertain a motion for approval.
I'd make that motion.
A motion, we have a second.
This is Ken Evans for the record, second.
A motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Great. Well, we look forward to working with you. Thanks. We will close agenda item 9, open agenda item 10, which is the discussion of the enabling work agreement. I'll turn it over to Mr. Arnold and kind of bring us back up to date and tell us a little bit about what's in the document. We did go through this at our last meeting, so tell us if any changes have been made, and if not, we'll move forward.
Right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for this opportunity. Under tab 10 is the enabling works agreement, and Mr. Bedane is correct. I'm wearing my Astros tie. I'd be wearing my Astros hat if I thought you would let me. And Ms. Fitzpatrick brought her Astros hat, so you guys are surrounded. But where the city of Houston, of course, stands with the city of Las Vegas, we had our tragedy, y'all had yours, where you guys were in our thoughts with all of that. The enabling works agreement is under tab 10. It is principally unchanged from the last time we met. Just to refresh everyone's memory, the Raiders Events Company, LV Stadium Events Company, LLC, owns a piece of property on which there will be a groundbreaking, in which they'll do some early work. This agreement puts that early work into perspective and allows that early work to occur under the auspices of SB1. Exhibit B sets out the early enabling work that they will do, which is basically clearing and grubbing and utility preparation and all of that kind of stuff for preparation for foundations and vertical construction. It requires that the raters pay for all those costs, that the authority is not obligated for any of those costs. The authority will be an additional insured under any contracts that are issued for that work by the raters. The authority will also be indemnified both by the contractor and by the raters events company for anything that happens out there. And the money spent by the Raiders Events Company for this early enabling work will be credited to the $100 million that SB1 requires the events company to pay, or the developer to pay, before the our bond funds kick in and pay a portion of that. And there, we have a provision in here for periodic monthly construction status reports. The reports need to be in a form mutually agreed upon between the authority and the raters, but I imagine that they would come in part of Mr. Bourdain's report would be the progress of what's going on, and Jeremy and I will sit down with them to see if you want any more detail in terms of money spent and where it went and things like that. But that is the agreement, and it is ready for execution should it be approved here today, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Arnold. Board have any questions for Mr. Arnold? If not, I'd entertain a motion. Motion to approve. Is there a second? Second from Mr. Tiberti. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that passes unanimously as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Close agenda item 10, open agenda item 11, which is receiving a presentation from the Raiders on the community benefit plan. I'll invite Mr. Ventrella, Mr. Bourdain, or Ms. Littlejohn to join us. Ask them if they would like to make some introductory comments, and I think Mr. Aguero will then work through the specifics of the document for us. Welcome, everybody. Thanks.
You opening remarks?
Volume, please. Get your mic, Mike. Get your mic together, Mark.
Thank you.
There you go.
Just some opening remarks, and then I'll turn it over to Dan and Lynn and Jeremy's presentation. I want to thank Dan and Jeremy. They've spent a lot of time on this. It's like watching a good chess match. And I also want to thank the senators, Senator Ford and Atkinson. They've been involved in this process. Peter from the Latin Chamber, if he's still here, Ken from the Urban Chamber, the board, and everybody that's provided feedback and guidance. We obviously took a document from the legislation from SB1 that didn't have a lot of specifics and exceeded every metric that we thought everybody was concerned about, which obviously pertained to jobs. And you'll see that this plan has the highest level of minority participation or involvement of any stadium project in the country. And it also has 3 metric points, and no other stadium project has had more than 2. So we did listen, we did react, and we did respond accordingly. And I'll allow, I don't know, Lynn, if you want to say some remarks before Jeremy goes through the document.
For the record, Lynn Littlejohn, Director of Community Benefits for Mortensen McCarthy. Really, my comments would just be trying to kind of give you an update of what's been going on, community benefits perspective-wise for the project. I reported a couple of months ago just kind of about the outreach that we've been doing. Procurement has commenced, so we have started making some awards, and just wanted to make you aware that out of the 15 awards we have made, 8 of those are to SB small businesses, and 2 of those small businesses actually are women or minority firms. So we're pleased with the due diligence we're doing, the outreach, and the inclusion so far on the project, and we would just continue that as we continue procurement through the rest of this year and into 2018.
Did you want to chime in, Dan? Okay, thanks. Mr. Guerrero, we'll turn it over to you and work us through the document itself.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to do so. Also want to echo Mr. Bodain's comments. I'm very thankful for all of the input relative to getting us to where we are today. It was a thoughtful and helpful exercise, and I'm appreciative of that. In your packets, there is tab number 11, which has the community benefits plan. I'm going to go through the sections of that plan with you here today. I realize this is the first time you've seen the plan in its totality, so I will try to walk through each section, and I'm more than happy to address questions relative to that, perhaps when I'm done, or Mr. Chairman, if you'd like to interrupt me, whatever's appropriate.
Mr. Guerrero, I'll just mention there, as Jeremy goes through the plan, if you have specific questions, maybe easier if you just make a note and we'll let you get through the document. There are a couple of issues that remain open. I know Jeremy will identify those, and then we can ask questions after he gets through the presentation. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's important to point out as we're going to go through what is a 10-page community benefits plan, that Senate Bill 1 is 65 pages long, and we are essentially trying to determine what is going to be created from 2 paragraphs of a 65-page document. And so the effort to try and understand what was intended by Senate Bill 1 and what was included was a significant exercise overall. However, I would begin this conversation by saying that this community benefits plan, I think, focuses on 2 things primarily. One is the effort toward inclusion, which I think is a principle behind the community benefits plan and has been since day one. And the second is the mechanism by which that inclusion will take place. I think that the raters, as they've developed this plan, have focused heavily on access and opportunity, creating the ability for folks to take advantage of the economic opportunities that are here. My role here today as staff for the Stadium Authority Board is to take the document that has been provided by the raters and to review it here with you. And so that is my exercise today. Section number 1 is the background. A couple of key things to point out in the background. I think the operative section, I'm not going to read through Senate Bill 1, although I'm happy to do that if the board would like me to, but the operative section, the operative words, if you will, from Senate Bill 1 are included here in the background, and I do think they are important. Senate Bill 1 requires the plan ensure the greatest possible participation by all segments of the community in the economic opportunities available in connection with the design, construction, and operation of the National Football League Stadium being developed by the developer here. We refer to that in this document as the project. We also refer to the developer. The raters have created an entity called LV Stadium Events Company, LLC. This is essentially the developer of the stadium and will ultimately be the operator of the stadium as a parent company subsidiary, if you will, of the raters organization. And so those are the parties that I'll talk through and the framework in which it's being evaluated. Section number 2 on page 1 is the community oversight and accountability. Sections 2.1 through sections 2.4 create the oversight committee itself. A 7-member oversight committee, 1 member appointed by the Stadium Authority Board that will serve as its chair, 1 member appointed by the governor, 1 by the state Senate Majority Leader, and 1 by the Speaker of the Nevada State Assembly. The remaining 3 will be appointed by the developer. In section 2.3, if I can jump over 2.2 for just a moment, it provides what their responsibility is, and that is to provide monitoring, oversight, and accountability relative to the plan itself. I do think it's important to note in the appointment of those members that the input from the local chambers is included. If we go to section 2.2 in the last line of section 2.2, it reads, the local chambers, as defined below, we'll talk about that in a moment, will have the opportunity to provide input to the appointing persons regarding the proposed members of the oversight committee. This was part of the conversation that we have, and it has been included in this revised draft. Flipping from page 1 to page 2. Section 2.5 enumerates the developer's responsibilities, and they're many. This is a rather lengthy paragraph, so I'll try to highlight some of the elements that I think are most important. It is the developer's responsibility to monitor this plan. The developer has included, and this was a request, commercially reasonable internal controls be developed either by the developer themselves or that they will cause their prime contractor, the stadium manager, and the concessionaire to have such controls to ensure that the provisions of the community benefits plan are being carried out as intended. Under Section 2.5, the developer has included monthly tracking of local small businesses, workforce utilization, and local participation that they will obtain from their prime contractors and from their operators. Those data will be made available to the authority, although I'll talk about public reporting in just a moment. The developer has indicated that they will have a point person, both during the pre-development phase, the construction phase, as well as during the operations phase. This person is referred to in the document as a community benefits director, and they have certain responsibilities. They're essentially the point person. I know Ms. Littlejohn has been here to provide us information, and she's been helpful throughout this process, and that has been good to have a point person, a person we know we can go to if we have questions, who will provide answers, and frankly, someone that if we get questions from a developer or a contractor, a small business, someone that wants more information, we have someone that we can give a single telephone number or an email to, and they get an immediate response. In terms of once the construction is completed, presumably 3 years from now, this will transition into a liaison. Whether there would be necessary to have a single person whose full-time job would be this, it wasn't sort of clear, so it was identified as that there will be a point person within the organization, within the operating entity, who will have the same responsibilities as Ms. Littlejohn has today, and that is to be that primary point of contact. Section 2.6 is the public reporting component. Again, a relatively lengthy paragraph, but I can sort of boil it down to its essence. During construction, we will receive quarterly reports. Those quarterly reports will continue into operation until such time as there have been 2 quarterly reports which indicate that the developer is in compliance, or in that point, the operator is in compliance. And once it is demonstrated that they are in compliance with the plan, that reporting will go to 1 time each year. That reporting is to include not only, and I'd like to just read this section because I do think it's important in terms of what will be included in the reports. The reports shall include identification of any programs created, so all of the programs that are included here in this plan, as well as performance metrics related thereto, including without limitation the share of the stadium construction undertaken by local small business enterprises pursuant to Section 3.2.1, which we'll talk about in a moment, which is specific to the 15% requirement, minority and women workforce hiring pursuant to Section 3.3.1. This is the hiring requirement that we'll talk about. And minority women business enterprise hiring, purchasing, and contracting shares pursuant to Sections 3.17 and Sections 3.34. I do want to make sure that this is clear. While some of those have specific targets, that second one, the minority business and women-owned business one does not have a specific requirement. But in this section, the developer has agreed to say, we'll tell you what our progress is. We will make sure that it's public, that everyone knows what we've been able to achieve relative to that hiring. The third component part in Section 2.6 is an audit provision. It is the last sentence, or maybe last 2 sentences, in Section 2.6. Audits will be conducted relative to both the development, or relative to the developer's compliance, both at the end of the construction period, at the second year of operations, once we believe that we're at stabilized operations, and then every 5th year thereafter through the term of the lease. That audit will use the same procedures that we have been agreed to previously in the Stadium Authority lease of that facility, so we'll have the same protections that were included in there, and the developer will provide the information necessary to comply with that audit. Section 2.7 is one that we spent some time talking about last time we were together, and that is the cost of compliance. The developer acknowledges and agrees that the implementation of and compliance with this plan is going to cost they're going to incur costs. They're going to have revenues that they may not achieve. They will have some decreases in revenue streams that they might otherwise have because they are putting programs in place that are designed to achieve goals other than revenue maximization. I want to make sure that it's clear the expectation here is not that these would somehow be commercially unreasonable, but this plan does not come free of cost. Difficult, of course, to fully assess because it's not just the Raiders organization, but their contractors and their partners throughout this process that are going to be deploying and effectuating this plan as set forth. On page 3, Mr. Chairman, is the compliance section. Compliance really has two alternative paths. One is section 2.8.1, in which the developer determines that it is in compliance. They say, hey, look, we're working through this, but we've identified that we are out of compliance with our expectations or the plain language of the community benefits plan. The second one, which is section 2.8.2, is if the oversight committee determines that there is noncompliance. In the event that the developer comes forward and says we have identified as part of our maintenance and our monitoring, our internal controls, that we are out of compliance, they have agreed to come forward with a remedial plan to essentially remedy that shortcoming. We'll come to the oversight committee and say we've identified this problem, we believe this is a remedy, and the oversight committee will have the ability to review that and provide comment relative to that. We've also put in a timeline. This has to happen within 45 days to ensure that there are not extended periods where this couldn't happen. I do want to make sure that it is clear here that both in sections 2.8.1, whether the developer identifies that this is problematic or whether the oversight committee identifies that it is problematic, that such remedial plan may not reduce the requirements of the plan without the approval of that oversight committee. The goal here is not to identify a problem and then reduce the requirements of the plan, but rather to identify a problem and find a community-based solution to address that going forward. Mr. Chairman, I'll flip to page 4, which begins the discussion of the community benefits themselves. There is some language that's included in number 3 at the outset, which essentially develops this concept of targeted groups. This idea that there are underrepresented members of the community, including people of color, women, minority, and women-owned businesses, veterans, and other targeted groups that have been discussed here and are discussed throughout this. The plan includes benefits for those targeted groups, including local, small, women, minority business, enterprise participation, community engagement, workforce diversity, technical assistance, and internships. These are the sections that I'm going to walk through as I go forward. Section 3.1 is titled Local, Small, and WMBE, or Women and Minority Business Enterprise Participation. Section 3.1 has an overview at the top that talks about the importance of these organizations in helping strengthen and diversify the overall economy. Section 3.1.2 deals with commitment and participation relative to that. This is the first of the objective targets that are identified. The developer will have its prime contractor, will enter into what is called a guaranteed maximum price contract. You all are probably aware of that. We've talked about it here. That contract shall require that 15% of the aggregate value of the construction work performed be subcontracted to local small business enterprises. The sentence that follows after that is included in Senate Bill 1, but I think also reflects the importance that the legislature had on this particular requirement. That shall provide that failure to comply with such a requirement shall be deemed a material breach of contract for the guaranteed maximum price contract. There are a number of things that the developer, the Raiders, their team has come forward with to say how will they effectuate that. Under Section 3.1.2, commitment and participation, these are specific to the construction phase of the stadium itself, and they include contacting vendors that have been identified through the Stadium Authority's website, structuring bid packages in a manner that will facilitate women and minority-owned businesses, collaborating with small and local business organizations, minority chambers, including the Latin Chamber, the National Association of Minority Contractors, the Women's Business Enterprise Council, the Nevada Contractors Association, Western Region Minority Supplier Development Council, Council, the Asian Chamber, the Urban Chamber, and the Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce of Nevada. This is collectively referred to throughout this document as the local chambers. In terms of the construction phase, they will use commercially reasonable efforts to engage and provide opportunities for business enterprises, minority and women business enterprises, consistent with the availability of those firms in the market. They will facilitate partnerships. They will design accelerated payment processes for small businesses and develop a retention plan to try and keep those small businesses on the job. Section 3.1.3 defines what a local small business is. This is consistent with with Senate Bill 1. Section 3.14 is the certification of businesses. It essentially says that the prime contractor is required to make sure that local small businesses are actually local small businesses that are participating in that program. Section 3.1.5 is local business support, indicates that the developer will have an outreach event. This is also covered in other areas. Section 3.1.6 is a series of prime contractor requirements that are set forth in Senate Bill 1, but also included here. These include the fact that the prime contractor is required to allow subcontractors to utilize their insurance coverage in order to make sure that they can get insurance coverage and can lower the cost associated with that. To ensure that local small business enterprises, that there's not discrimination in terms of hiring or any specific hiring requirements, that they are allowed to hire the folks that they need to for their business. And then that letter D on page 6 is to also provide a mentorship program where the prime contractor will provide mentoring to subcontractors in order to ensure that they have that process. Under section 3.1.7 that is labeled success of participation, this essentially requires that the prime contractor report to the developer on a periodic basis the level of participation in terms of local small businesses, enterprises, as well as women and minority-owned businesses in the project itself. An additional sentence was added here, which says that the periodic basis of such reporting shall not be less than the public reporting requirements that we just talked about under Section 2.6. Section 3.2 is the community engagement section. Again, this talks about overview and participation. This section is also specific to the construction phase of the project. There's a list here in terms of the things that will be done, including developer open houses, conduct pre-bid meetings, regular meetings with the local chambers, as well as getting input and recommendations from those local chambers relative to strategies that might support this plan, increase awareness, or otherwise be helpful in effectuating the plan. Communication and outreach through multiple channels, including internet, radio, newspaper, and other media, having a liaison with community organizations and neighborhood groups as well in order to facilitate that outreach during that construction process. Atop page 7 is section 3.2.2, which talks about the community access program. This is programs that are aimed at veterans, at-risk youth, low-income residents, and others to provide them greater access to the facility, including such things as offering no-cost or discounted admission tickets for veterans, military families, disadvantaged youth, and low-income residents as well. Section 3.3 talks about workforce diversity. And in section 3.3.1, it talks about what is at the core here, and that is maximizing employment opportunities. Section 3.3.1 relates to, in some cases, construction, in some cases, construction and operations. I will walk through each one of those. In terms of, under A, in terms of collaboration, working with local chambers to assist with recruitment and referral of workers. We already talked about what those local chambers are, but maximizing the pipeline of potential workers by tapping those chambers and asking for their assistance. That A refers to both the construction and operations phase. In terms of low income, a community workforce program that provides entry-level employment for low-income residents, hands-on industry experience. This one is specific to the construction industry. Under C is the identification of veterans as part of this workforce. We talked previously about helmets to hard hats and bringing them in, again, both operations and construction. In terms of faith-based leadership, developing those relationships, keeping those lines of communication open, again, both construction and operations. Apprenticeship training programs in terms of which the developer work closely with building trades and unions and those type of things to develop apprenticeship programs during construction. Work readiness support, again, during construction to work with sourcing agencies to ensure that disadvantaged individuals are prepared for work by having things like work clothes, boots, and tools so that they can actually have the opportunity to participate in some of these programs. And under G, also during construction, union partnerships with seeking to facilitate apprenticeship programs to extend those in order to develop and expand the labor pool. On page 8 is something similar. Again, both operations and construction for the LGBTQ community. And again, maintaining relationships and developing to expand and facilitate that pipeline of potential workers to the development. Under what is 3.1, we're now on page 8, but still in the same section, is a paragraph that is labeled I, diversity. And this is the developer, this is the targets that were referred to earlier. One for construction, one for operations. And so I'd like to talk through those for a moment because I know they've been a big part of the discussion. The developer's contract with its prime contractor, this will be Mortensen and McCarthy in this case, shall require a workforce participation rate of not less than the combined total of 38% of construction work hours shall be performed by minority and female workers. Once the construction is completed, with respect to operations after the opening of the stadium, the developer's contract with any concessionaire and any stadium manager overseeing operations shall require such contractors to set a workforce participation target of not less than a combined total of 55% of the work hours on days in which events take place, including setup and teardown, shall be performed by minority and female workers. Again, this is sort of that second open issue as you identified, Mr. Chairman, and that is some debate relative to specific focus on event-related days versus all activities that occur at the stadium. Section 3.3.2 deals with first source employment. And this essentially says that if we're going to have apprenticeship programs and training programs, that there needs to be a pipeline between those programs and making sure that those employees have a pathway to get full-time employment or gainful employment on the project itself. That's what Section 3.3.2 does. Section 3.3.3 indicates that the developer will encourage and support livable wage programs for employees working on the construction and operation of the project. Section 3.3.4, under the same major heading here, is the utilization of certified business enterprises minority workforce. As I indicated before, Mr. Chairman, the identification of specific targets here is a point of debate, if you will, between and during our conversations. But this section itself is designed specifically to encourage that type of employment. And so what I'd like to do is go through this in just a moment because I do think it's a very important paragraph in the document. Throughout the construction and operations of the project, the developer will encourage and support A, opportunities for minority and women-owned businesses and other targeted groups, and B, purchasing opportunities for minority and women-owned businesses and other certified business enterprises for direct services, for goods, procurement, and vendor opportunities. Further, the developer will utilize reasonable good faith efforts to encourage and support equal employment hiring opportunities that include minority hiring opportunities for low-income residents, hiring opportunities for members of the LGBTQ community are all included here. In addition to that, there was some discussion early on in our conversation relative to the design element. Those pieces that I just talked about were specific to construction and operations. This additional paragraph was added relative to the design. The developer, the authority, and the oversight committee acknowledged the design of the stadium was largely adapted from a prior project. And I do think this is a point that was missed. I'll be honest, it was missed by me until well into the conversations that I had with Mr. Ventrelli. And that was that a lot of the development happened for lot of the design elements relative to the stadium happened throughout a very long history of thinking about where the stadium might ultimately go. The fact that it's now being developed in Clark County, in our community, means that we're benefiting from a lot of that work that happened previously, and I think it's important to point out. Substantial design work was completed as a result of that. However, the developer agrees to utilize good faith efforts to encourage the participation of local businesses, minority and women-owned businesses, and other targeted groups in the remaining design work occurring after implementation of this plan and on the stadium itself. And then this last piece I think is also worth highlighting for a moment. There was the concept of what does design really mean? Does this concept of design is somewhat expanded, if you will, to include the concept of pre-construction and infrastructure-related activities on the project, including without limitation the developer's temporary office space, preview and sales center, landscape design, construction training centers, and environmental and engineering work have all been included as part of this utilization of certified business enterprise and minority workforce in the section 3.3.4. On page 9, Mr. Chairman, is mentoring and technical assistance. There are 3 sections here. All of them play a similar role. 3.4, there are 3 paragraphs. The first paragraph, 3.4.1 and 3.3.3, are specific to the construction phase of the project. Section 3.4.2 is specific to construction and operations. Section 3.4.1 is the local small business enterprise resource center, which the developer has agreed to develop as a tool to strengthen and expand small, women, and minority-owned businesses in the community throughout the construction process, understanding that there may need to be some development around that. The third paragraph is section 3.4.3, which is the internship program, which the developer has 2 pieces to it. One is an internship program during construction that will offer high school and college students the opportunity to participate in paid internships during the summer to expose them to a variety of construction-related activity. And in the second sentence of that same section, the developer will also use commercially reasonable efforts to include participation in the internship program with any contract with its prime contractor and any such prime contractor that subcontracts to local small business enterprises to help provide that mentorship program that I talked about earlier. In between those 2 paragraphs is the Workforce Training and Development Apprenticeship Program, which will apply to both construction and operations, that will look to develop skills in construction and operation-related trade activities, including engineering, facility operations, sales, marketing, and information technology in order to try to develop that portion of the workforce. Finally, Mr. Chairman, at the bottom of page 9 and extending to page 10 is the charitable and civic endeavors. Section 4.1 is entitled The Raiders Community Relations. All of you, I think, have had the opportunity to see the Raiders Community Relations report that they brought. I think many of you, probably all of us, are aware of these type of programs that go on in the NFL and the long tradition of the Raiders Community Relations Department in terms of outreach. Not unlike what Commissioner Sisolak talked about earlier, there is countless stories of this over the Raiders' history. The Raiders have also agreed that the developer will work with the Raiders to continue the production of the annual report, just like the one that you saw in substantially a similar format, to be produced every year to ensure that those are enumerated. On the top of page 10 are a number of those type of programs. Frankly, I probably could have filled up 3 pages with the ones that have occurred historically. As Dan and I were talking, as Dan could have filled it up, not me. But nonetheless, these are just some examples. I certainly don't want to suggest that this is an exhaustive list. Section 4.2 is NFL grants and funding, which may very well turn out to be important to this community, as the NFL has programs and the Raiders will work with the NFL to see that that occurs. And then Section 3.4, which is the Raiders Foundation. The primary charitable arm of the Raiders will be active in Clark County to increase community and civic health through military support and youth development, which is the primary focuses of that organization. With that, Mr. Chairman, that's an overview of the community benefits plan as it currently stands. I certainly stand ready to answer any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you, Mr. Aguero. Appreciate that. Again, appreciate all the work that everyone has put in to get the community benefits plan to this point. I guess I'd just say to Mark and Dan, over the last few weeks, we've focused on open issues. I think it's helpful, it is for me, to go back and look at all of the issues that have been resolved and the significance of what those are. It's pretty easy to get caught up in what we haven't quite agreed to yet and not remember how much of this plan we haven't agreed to. So I just wanted to point that out and say that I appreciate all that is here. What I'd like to do is, to the extent possible, kind of work through the document if there are questions. The two areas that Jeremy pointed out that are still open, I'd probably leave those to last when it comes to questions. But does the board have questions in the areas that we really feel like have been largely resolved? Happy to go through those. Feel free to ask those now.
If I may, Mr. Chair, Bill
Hornbuckle. Sure.
Jeremy, the 7-member board, is there a requirement for timing of its being put together?
Mr. Chairman, for the record, Jeremy Aguero, no, it's not. There is not. The expectation would be once the plan is completed that we would work jointly to try and get that done as quickly as possible. We have written in, Mr. Hornbuckle, into the lease agreement itself, concept, and Mr. Ventrelli can correct me if he thinks that I'm saying this incorrectly, that this board would provide, the Stadium Authority Board would provide some degree of oversight and enforcement until such time as that board was put into place. But the goal would be to create it as quickly as possible.
Thank you. Second question, is there timing around the reporting out? The audit function, or whatever we ultimately call it, will be through that board process, or what process?
Again, Mr. Chairman, for the record, Jeremy Aguero. The quarterly reports would be prepared by the developer throughout the construction process. In terms of the timing that we have so far, we believe we could have a preliminary report for the fourth quarter of 2017 prepared by the end of January. It's not going to be a full-blown report because we're there sort of getting up to speed at the same time, but enough that we could talk through some of the key metrics and the progress. Then the expectation would be that after first quarter of 2018 and every quarter thereafter, essentially 30 days after the end of each one of those quarters, those reports would be developed. Those reports would be submitted to the Oversight Committee, and then they would be copied to the Stadium Authority Board to the extent that this board wanted that to happen. I should note, Mr. Hornbuckle, that relative to the small business requirement, Senate Bill 1 specifically requires monthly reporting on that. And while there is some additional monthly reporting that the developer may require of its contractor, that's the only piece that Senate Bill 1 essentially says they have to make available on a monthly basis to the Stadium Authority Board itself.
Thank you. Because I picked up on very early from Ms. Littlejohn, 8 of 15 awards, if inclusive of all of the awards, is commendable. I also sense from the community still at large that knowledge isn't out there yet. And the sooner this process starts, you're doing great work. Let's make sure everybody understands that, if in fact that is true of the entire project.
Right.
Would be a comment. My last one, and I'll shut up for now.
No, don't shut up.
The veterans component. At one point, it feels like it's in the percentages here in the verbiage, and at one point it is not. Is it, or is it not?
Mr. Chairman, for the record, Jeremy Aguero. I believe that the correct answer to that question, and again, I'll certainly defer to the raters to correct me if I say this incorrectly, is that veterans are absolutely included as one of these targeted groups. So while we didn't repeat veterans all the way through this entire project, because targeted groups are included in the design, construction, and operation elements of the plan that's submitted, that veterans would be included. Now, there are some specific programs that have identified veterans, like the Helmets to Hard Hats program is a veterans program. And so that was specifically enumerated, but they are included in the targeted groups that are highlighted throughout the document.
And so when I read 38 and 55 and it says minority and female workers, that's intended to include veterans as well, or
no? For the record, Mr. Chairman, Jeremy Aguero, no, that would only include. I mean, that would not include veterans per se. If you had a minority person who was a veteran, they would be included. If you have a woman who's a veteran, they would be included. But that target is specific to minorities and to women.
Okay, I'll reserve comment on that. Thank you.
Mr. Evans? Yes. For the record, Ken Evans, a couple of general comments. To build on what my colleague, Mr. Hornbuckle, brought up, it is commendable to have 15 contracts awarded, 8 of them to small businesses, and then 2 of them to women or minority-owned firms. As a part of the reporting, I would assume, but I want to clarify for the record, that we would report not only the number of awards given, but the raw dollar amount given, so that we could get a feel for both the number of contracts as well as the total aggregated dollar amount. That's correct. Okay. And then my other generic question would be Section 3.2. What I wanted to find out is, would we want, right now it says that developers shall accomplish this through the following strategies during construction of the project. What I was wondering is, should we also word that similar to Section 3.3.1, overview and participation, where it says that it will be done for the project for targeted groups during design, construction, and operations as specified? I mean, I know that's an editorial comment, but I'm just trying to make sure, once again, that we always accommodate all opportunities during all 3 phases of the development project.
Thanks, Mr. Evans. I'll provide an answer to that. We endeavored, when we talked about these matters, to try to understand and differentiate the things that would go on during the construction phase and the things that would go on during the operations phase. And although there's a lot of repetition in 3.2 and 3.3, the items enumerated in 3.2 are intended to be specific construction-related items, things like open houses for bid packages and pre-bid informational meetings. Those things are specific to construction and not operations. That's why they're found in that section. And the 3.3 section contains a lot of overlap with matters that are mentioned in 3.2, which would also be done both in construction and operations. But the 3.2 section is supposed to be specific with respect to construction.
Okay, I think I understand. You're not necessarily saying that we're going to exclude community engagement during operations. You just had specific things outlined here. And I would assume the same holds true for business and procurement opportunities as well.
Correct, and indeed there is, if you compare the sections, a lot of repetition in that regard. We just separated out things like bid packages, which are only going to happen during the construction phase.
Okay, thank you for now.
Certainly.
Mr. Chairman, Jeremy, I don't know who to direct this to, Dallas on. Can we have someone, maybe it's Ms. Littlejohn, speak to the history of developing and managing apprenticeships, internship, business resource? Give us, the group here today, a sense of your ability to execute successfully behind this, because there's a lot here for you. And maybe you've done it before and I've missed it, but maybe for my benefit, if you could just give us a sense, a comfort level here that you have history in this and we don't have to worry about execution.
Sure. I will say that I do have history in this. My role with Mortensen, that's why I'm employed by and have been for 21 years, has been to develop and implement these such programs on all of our major projects all across the country. And so I have implemented both the mentorship program, kind of the resource center program that we've talked about here, in terms of helping small women and minority-owned firms grow and develop. I mean, we know that it is important for them to receive contracts, but it's also important for us to help them grow what we call their back-of-house functions, which is really what...
Wow.
Good morning. I would like to call today's meeting for Wednesday, November 8th of the Board of County Commissioners to order.
Good morning, Commissioners. The first item on the agenda is
that they need to know and be kind of well versed at in terms of being successful in managing their construction contracts. So that's the Resource Center, and I do have experience in terms of developing those and implementing those, and having the construction community business owners be pleased about kind of the level of instruction they receive. The internship program, we have developed that all across the country, and really it is seen as a tool, again, to expose youth to our industry, both the trade and the professional side, specifically for women and people of color who historically have not had a great opportunity to be exposed to our industry and to understand our industry. So we will go out to the high schools and offer youth who are interested in the math and sciences in STEM an opportunity to have a paid internship on the project site over the summer to just get exposed to what engineers would do, how we interact with the owners, how we interact with architects, and really kind of what engineers do. So they would come on as kind of an engineering aid following our engineering teams to understand the professional side of our business. And so, yes, we have implemented that program all across the country and still do it in the Twin Cities. And it's very popular. Students love it in terms of them really just finding out about the other side of our businesses outside of just the trade work.
This is
okay, so there's nothing here that's new to you. You're going to hit the ground running with everything in this document.
Yeah, I mean, what would be?
I'm sorry, folks. I have to say this,
would be
okay?
really having to just reach out to the organization.
There's no business assistance for small minority firms. They'll come in, they'll be asked to provide insurance requirements, bonding capacity, and other matters that cost some money, and they won't be given a budget for what they have to come up with. They'll be given then a bill, and they won't be able to pay the bill to provide any financial backing. They'll be booted out. That happens a lot. So this is disingenuous. Just saying. I've seen this tons of times. It's shameful.
The project was providing benefit to the broadest cross-section of the community. I'm just asking what when we talk about reporting results, I want to make sure that they're not just an aggregate number that says, yeah, we got to 55%, but we don't know what made up the 55%.
Oh, well, the 55% doesn't pertain to construction, so I can't answer that. I can speak to the 38%. What we typically track would be by contractor who performs work on the site, because the goals, as you know, are expressed as a percentage of total work hours, not number of individuals, because we think it's more reflective of really who's on the project. So we typically would track it by subcontractor, and they would be reporting the total hours they've worked, and then a breakdown of those hours by minority and by female. So then we would know total hours, total minority hours, total female hours, and then the percentages. And then obviously, because that's where the 38% goal is attached to, but we also would have the capability then to be paying attention to if they're the veterans and the other targeted groups that are identified in the plan. So yes, you will get a level of detail to be able to see how each subcontractor is doing, how each contract category is doing, and then in aggregate about how the project in its totality is doing.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Tiberti?
Forgive me, Jeremy, Tito Tiberti for the record. Perhaps you said it and it's in here, and forgive me. When you were talking about audit early in your report, I don't need to know the name, but what kind of an organization or person or who would be doing that audit? Where is that? Who selects that, and what kind of qualifications they have to have? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, for the record, Jeremy Aguero. Mr. Tiberti, the process that we put forward, that we established in the lease agreement, would essentially require that it be a certified public accountant or someone that's generally agreed to by both the Stadium Authority Board and the Raiders. That person, with the cost of that audit, would be split between the Stadium Authority Board and the Raiders. And essentially what we've said is that during these specific hurdle years, that auditor will also have a requirement to audit the provisions of essentially the developer's compliance with this plan. So the expectation would be that it's that same group that would go through that exercise in order to not create an additional audit requirement in terms of time, but an additional element to the audit that's being created. Thank you.
Mr. Evans?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One more question related to certification. I know it talks about certification for small businesses, but then in section 3.3.4, where it talks about use of certified business enterprises, and I'm not going to go too far on another thing that we'll come back to, but just in general, as far as certification is concerned, I know that there are several recognized agencies that we look to in terms of being certified as either a WBE, a MBE, or a DBE, et cetera. Do we need to address that? And maybe this is also for Jeremy. Do we need to address the source of certification as well in this plan, or are we just going to assume that we'll take the industry standard certification agencies?
This dude is passive aggressive. Just say we need to do that rather than the other. Jeez
certification
Louise.
agency, then we would accept that. So in terms of women and minority-owned firms being certified by DOT, right, is DBE, but up under the DBE umbrella, they really are women or minority-owned firms, being able to show that certification, being able to show either a different state certification, being able to show either, WeBank or the Western Regional Minority Supply Development Association, those sorts of things. All of those entities have certification programs, and they are recognized across the country. And so as long as it is, like I said, a recognizable certification agency, we would accept that certification. It's typically the practice.
Mr. Chairman, if I can add just one thing to respond to Mr. Evans, I would also refer you to the developer's monitoring and administration of the plan in section 2.5. This is the requirement that the developer or its prime contractor or the stadium manager and the concessionaire, I should use and as opposed to or, will have commercially reasonable internal controls and monitoring procedures related to the implementation and compliance with this plan. Right? The expectation is that those internal controls, those compliance measures will do exactly what Ms. Littlejohn was just indicating, not only for construction, but all the way through operations, to ensure that if they're identifying someone as a specific type of business or one of the targeted groups, that they actually are that.
Okay, and thank you. Part of the reason why I'm doing this too is this is not just for our benefit, but for the benefit of those that may have companies that are not currently certified. This just puts everybody on notice and on the same playing field. This is a step that you'll need to complete so that we ensure we hit our targets and meet our marks when it's all said and done.
There you go.
Thank you.
Jeez.
Any of the other questions or comments? I keep saying questions, but if you have comments, now's certainly the time to give us those as well. And if not, we'll move on to questions or comments on the open items. Which are in 331 toward the end and 334. Mr. Hornbuckle?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jeremy, maybe if you could define, and I suspect Dan would like to do the same, but define where we are and the discrepancy is, or the ask versus where we are would be helpful.
Mr. Chairman, Jeremy Aguero for the record, Mr. Hornbuckle, and I'll certainly defer to Mr. Ventrelli. If I say anything that he disagrees with, he can interrupt me or stop me, or we can say something different. And throughout this document, there is a concept of minority and women business enterprises will be included as part of this project. That is included. I've tried to highlight all those that were there. In our discussions with the raters, one of the comments that we made relative to the early drafts that we had was that we believed that it would be important that there were specific targets relative to minority business enterprises and women business enterprises that were included in there. As Mr. Bedane indicated, there are certain targets in here. The raters felt during that essentially adding additional targets would be out of market, that it was just beyond what other community benefit plans had done. As staff, we disagree with that a bit, just a difference of opinion in terms of that, and believe that that is an important measure in terms of inclusion, not only in terms of the workforce, but also in terms of businesses themselves. The raters had indicated, and I think this is a very valid argument, that Senate Bill 1 does something kind of different than what other legislation does. It requires a small business requirement on the construction element of the project of 15%. If you imagine a Venn diagram with all of the minority businesses and all of the small businesses, there's going to be places where they cross over, but they're not going to cross over in every one of those places. And we respect the fact that that includes some, that would create a real legitimate challenge for the prime contractor in order to meet that requirement. So the recommendation that we made in our comment was to say, okay, if we were going to have that, then what we would do is during the construction portion of the project, we would establish a minority and women-owned business, disadvantaged business enterprise target, and allow a one-for-one subtraction of small business requirement that's set forth in Senate Bill 1. In doing this, we essentially, we would hope to eliminate any of the duality that would create such a challenge for the developer. And then where that first percentage, that 15%, does not apply to the operations phase, that those two requirements, the workforce requirement and then the women and minority business, disadvantaged business enterprise requirement, would carry forward during operations. So essentially where we are today in the document is that there is the encourage and support and seek out ways in order to develop those. There's also we asked for to have the reporting of those MBEs and WBEs to be included so that there would be an accountability measure built in there. But in this document, the targets relative to those groups are not included at this time.
Okay. And the other issue?
The second issue? The second issue is specific to the hiring target for the operations phase. The hiring target for construction includes 38% for women and minorities in the construction phase of the project. The operations phase is 55% women and minorities, but it's limited to event days. And event days is broadly defined. Event days includes not only the day that the event takes place, but anytime there's setup or breakdown of that event. The comment that was made by staff relative to that particular issue was that by only including event days, you're essentially excluding what is obviously a relatively small share of the employees that are working in that stadium 365 days a year. The comment that was made and the position of staff was that the minority hiring and women hiring requirement should apply just as much to part-time employees on event days as it should to full-time employees who operate and run the stadium itself. Importantly, I think, is that, number one, the number of employees that will take place on event days is, of course, the vast majority of the employees of the hours being incurred, that is a fair point that is included in this document. Nonetheless, it was a comment that we have gone back and forth and is not included in this document today.
And maybe my final question on that is a third item potentially, or is just the ongoing nature of WMBEs as a business for ongoing operations. We talked about employment, but not a requirement for doing business with designated businesses, organizations.
Well,
correct?
Mr. Chairman, Jeremy Aguero, Mr. Hornbuckle, I think that there is the requirement that they will encourage and support such, but there is not a requirement that they hit a specific target, no.
Very important to listen to this. It's also very important to read the document as I'm doing because it has some weaknesses in it. So don't discount this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess what I'm going to ask is, how would you like to proceed? Would you like to just take one item and then the other item? Or just go ahead?
However it works.
Fair enough. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, what I'll state, I want to set the tone, and I did get a chance to speak with everyone before the meeting. In some of the questions I may ask or pose this afternoon, my aim is to be positive and proactive, and at the same time make sure that we maintain a spirit of cooperation and collaboration, because I think we all want the same thing. First and foremost, we want a world-class facility, but then at the same time, just as importantly, we want to make sure that there's diversity and inclusion throughout all three phases: pre-development, construction, and then the ongoing operations. So with that spirit in mind, from my perspective, as an engineer myself, as someone that's worked in the development arena, one of the things I'm familiar with is sometimes if you don't put things in writing and if you don't have concrete objective targets, despite your best efforts or your best faith efforts, sometimes you don't quite hit the mark. In addition to that, please know that one of the other things I think we're trying to do as board members is create a bridge between hardcore requirements and then managing expectations of what is actually doable given the universe that's out there. So my first thing that I just would like to get some feedback on is, ideally, from my perspective, I'd love to see some participation rates. Participation rates in all three areas for both employment as well as for business procurement opportunities. But what I wanted to find out is there a reason or reluctance to have participation rates that we're not familiar with or not aware of? And then I may have a follow-up question after that.
I think I'd like to answer the question more broadly as posed. And I think it requires going back to the special session. Importantly, we did not start with this conversation from a blank slate. At that special session, there was a very specifically negotiated document that set forth expectations for a community benefit plan. I am very familiar with said document because I wrote it before it was signed. That document does not contain a single hiring target. It does not contain a single numerical metric. It does not contain a single minority hiring requirement. It does not contain a single target of any kind. When we started this process, we started with a legislative obligation. That legislative obligation is for the developer to develop a plan. That legislative obligation is not a negotiation. It's not a plan that merits approval by a board or any other entity. We certainly had the ability to adhere to exactly what was promised at the legislature. We don't have to speculate about what was promised. It was signed on a document. That wasn't good enough for the Raiders. The Raiders think that this is important. The Raiders think that a genuine commitment is important. And although we could have sort of sat on our hands with generalities and a lack of targets, we chose not to do that because we feel that a commitment in this area is a hallmark of this stadium that we want everybody to be proud of. So when we did this, we said, well, what's the starting point? The starting point should be to analyze what other community benefit plans in connection with other stadiums or projects of this magnitude have. What obligations are in those agreements? We asked for research from Mr. Aguero. We conducted our own research. We asked for research from Mortensen. Every one of those materials provided indicated that most projects, many projects, endeavor to meet one target, whether that's a workforce participation target or a minority business enterprise target. Most projects endeavor to meet one target. Many projects endeavor to meet two targets. So we began with a target that was established by the legislature. We didn't get, essentially, to be colloquial about it, we didn't get to pick the first target, right? The legislature picked the first target for us. The legislature picked the 15% target. So we started with one target and said, well, market for a stadium, you could argue, is one target. That could be good enough. That's what the document that was signed at the legislature indicates. That wasn't good enough for us. What we said was, how do we do better? How do we be the gold standard of this thing? Well, the most aggressive was two targets. So we said, let's find our second target. What should our second target be if we were going to be aggressive? We sat in these meetings for the last 6 months, just like everybody else did. We're cognizant of public comment and the community's concerns, and every one of those concerns, or the overwhelming majority of those concerns, are about jobs. People are interested in jobs. People care about jobs. It's what we heard in Carson City during the legislative session. It's what we hear during public comment. It's what we hear from this community. So we were very clear. We wanted our second target to be jobs, and that's exactly what we did. We researched what the most aggressive minority hiring targets were and exceeded them. That 38% target on construction is the highest minority workforce target in the history of building stadiums in America. We're very proud of it. We don't mind telling people we're proud of it. It's important to us, and we thought we spoke with our actions in establishing it. After that, we got requests for other targets. 2 is the most aggressive market. Then we got a request for a third target. Would you be willing to establish a third target during operations? So we did our best to endeavor to figure out what that was, admittedly on a pretty short time frame, and came up with an extremely aggressive 55% minority participation workforce target throughout operations. Again, we exceeded the market. We exceeded what other community benefit plans established, but we were proud to do it. We think it's important. We think the commitment's important. So we added that third metric, even though that third metric is an out-of-market expectation. That third metric, combined with the 38%, combined with the 15%, is the single most aggressive minority hiring commitment in the history of building stadiums in this country. Moreover, from what the research that we've done and we've been informed, it's the largest commitment that's been made on a Nevada Public Works project. We're really proud of that. There was no, to my understanding, diversity commitment made as part of the Tesla project. The other stadiums and arenas that have been built in this town don't make those commitments. That's okay. We wanted to be better. We wanted to have a metric that we're proud of, and we feel like we came up with 3 different individual achievable metrics that we're proud of. They're aggressive, but that's okay. When we talked about women and minority-owned businesses, we said, we're very serious about making commitment there. Mr. Aguero went through a document that I think contained 11 very specific individual obligations with respect to women and minority-owned businesses. Reporting their performance, structuring bid packages to encourage their participation, collaborating with efforts with those entities to effectuate the plan, providing opportunities in the construction phase, facilitating partnerships with vendors that are women and minority-owned businesses, pre-bid informational meetings for women and minority-owned businesses, prime contractor reporting obligations with respect to those businesses, construction opportunities, purchasing opportunities, design-specific opportunities, and a resource center for those businesses. There are 11 different enumerated specific commitments made to women and minority-owned businesses in this document. It's something that the Raiders are very serious about. It is an out-of-market expectation to expect more than 2 variables. That's okay. We're fine and happy to commit to 3 variables. We think it's the most aggressive minority workforce participation plan in the history of stadiums, and we're very proud of it. We think it's something that everybody on this board and the community should be very proud of too.
Okay, and thank you. And thank you, Mr. Ventrelli. And I wanted that insight and that perspective to follow the pathway for how we got here, because I believe there's 3 sides to every story. Your side, the other person's side, and somewhere in the middle is where reality is. So having said that, might I suggest or just pose to you that great job on the employment and coming up with specific targets for employment. Just keep in mind that from a business procurement standpoint, what individuals might be looking for is one more specific objective target for that arena, because keep in mind the minority businesses, the women-owned businesses, and the other small businesses, they're the job creators. So by ensuring that we hit targets there, we're also ultimately ensuring that we hit some of the employment targets as well. So just a different perspective that I would put out there.
Appreciate that, and I would say that in no way could anyone do better at achieving that workforce participation than by committing to the greatest workforce participation number in the history of building stadiums in this country. We're very proud of that.
Okay, so Mr. Chair, let me ask, so where are we in terms of coming up with specific percentages? Because what I would share is this. My concern, and I have a feeling it's not just going to be my concern.
Like you're
Historically,
scared, man. Just say
if you
it.
don't have objective participation rates, there's going to be a concern that we may not
He is
know
so
there's an issue or
passive-aggressive.
problem
Just
until
be aggressive.
3 months after the report comes out, or worse than that. And I appreciate the rigor and the structure that you put in place in terms of some of the things you intend to do. Mr. Chair, what I would ask is, are we at an impasse here in terms of getting objective criteria, or how do we get past this impasse?
Yeah, you're at an impasse. Just say it.
Mr. Evans, I would, the way I'd phrase it right now is that we've been working hard, a lot on this document over the past couple of months.
So?
We are presenting where we are right now, and we'll continue to work with the raters and try and close the last two gaps that are open. But right now, those two issues are haven't been agreed upon. We're continuing to talk about it, trying to work them out.
Mr. Evans, sorry.
Mr. White?
If I might, Tommy White for the record, there's one thing that a lot of our board members up here don't see, and that's the actual workers out there. The actual workers that are waiting to go to work on this job, that this community benefits plan is holding up. Because we need to know, as the guys that are going to send the workers out there, how many people we're going to need. So the more we sit here and the more we beat this document up, or try to figure out how we're going to get to the numbers, those numbers could be met as we're sending people out. I know the construction industry. I'm sure there's a lot of people on this board that know the business industry. But we've got hundreds of people that want to go to work. We got bid packages that want to get let. But we're sitting here beating this document up. And I know there's a lot of board members on this board that would like to get past this document and start working on more serious documents than this one.
What?
So if I might, I'd like to call for a question on the
This
document.
guy is completely wrong.
No.
He's no. He's wrong.
A couple of comments. One is
he's
the
wrong.
agenda item is not posted for action, so the question cannot be called. Secondly, we haven't even quite figured out what the question would be yet, in that we do not really have the direct responsibility to approve this document before the effort can move forward, or the document can move forward. What I personally think we have is the responsibility to make sure that the plan does meet the law. So I've got a couple of questions along those lines. And the raters have agreed to continue to work with us to try and close the gaps on the differences that we have open. I would anticipate, I guess one of my first questions would be, I assume that what we have agreed upon, you're going to go put into place. It doesn't take a signed document for you to go do what obviously you already want to do and we agree with. So I assume that's right?
The only disagreement I would have is the use of the future tense there. As Lynn explained, this is already being implemented.
Sure. Great. Thank you. So on, I'm sorry, Mr. Epstein, you were...
I just had a quick question. Lawrence Epstein for the record here. I had a quick question on section 3.3I, diversity and the 55% target. I just want to understand the arguments as to why that would only apply to sort of event day activities. What are the arguments as to why that should only apply to the event day activities?
Mr. Epstein, I don't think there were arguments. I think we were just sort of trying to find the right number. And we scrambled this week to try to get data from other stadium operators and to try to get data from other entities that run stadiums in the country to figure out what an aggressive target that could be set there would be. We wanted to set a target that we were proud of. And what the feedback we were able to get most immediately was related to event days. That was the data that we were able to provide. So we thought it best to create a mechanism that reflected the data so that we could have a target that we thought was a reasonable target supported by data that was achievable. I don't think any of us are opposed to talking about that target, it may not be 55% then. The 55% relates specifically to the criteria that's being used to describe it, obviously. So if you were to want to use a different analytical mechanism and you were going to look at year-round operations, maybe the right number is not 55%, but we know the 55% can relate to the description of that variable, if that makes sense.
That does. Jeremy, maybe you can answer this because you mentioned it in your comments earlier. You said something to the effect of that the vast majority of the employment would be sort of that game day activities. Is there any breakdown as to what the vast majority is? Is it 60%, 90%? Any idea there?
Mr. Chairman, for the record, Jeremy Aguero, and I'll defer to Mr. Newcomb, who may have more information relative because he operates some of these places, or Mr. Hornbuckle. But at least based on the research we've done, I mean, we're talking about 5 to 7% of the total work hours would be outside of event and game day. And they may have different numbers. That was just sort of very preliminary from conversations that we had. I don't believe it's a substantial number.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Epstein, one point that might merit clarification there is one of the things that makes this complicated, which I think Jeremy kind of is getting to, is that the way these things are handled team by team is very different, right? Some teams have people who just work generally in the operation who also work on the stadium. Some teams have whole companies that are just dedicated to this operation. Some teams hire a third party to oversee this operation. So that's why synthesizing that data to determine that, can't say I disagree with Mr. Aguero's number. I feel like we just don't know. Because the situations are all so different.
Thanks.
Maybe my 2 cents, operating one of those buildings, we have about 358 employees, give or take, for T-Mobile. We're high single digits. We're 8 or 9% full-time staff on a Tuesday versus an event day. And then it blows up for what we're talking about. So it's not a substantive amount. Because it includes female, 55%, while commendable, isn't an overly stretched goal. I must say that openly. So I guess under those two considerations, it would really just be on the intent of in the spirit of what was intended. And yes, you should, particularly the last point you made about, are we going to farm it out? Are we going to do it in-house? That's very, very relevant. But in the spirit of what's trying to be accomplished here, making it inclusive of the totality of the organization, whatever that organization is, would just really be simplifying this process and hopefully move this ball forward, particularly including female. The goal, while commendable, is simply not that difficult. And frankly, we blow that goal away.
Yep.
Doesn't mean that's not a worthy goal. We don't want a stadium, we want an arena. So there might be a different complexion to that. And ultimately, how you run it ought to come into consideration. But the spirit of what's been intended by that particular item would really be inclusive of the entire staff. That's my comment. Thank you.
Mr. Evans? Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the spirit of trying to move things forward, what I'm wondering is, one of the things I did is I made it a point to take a look at some of the research at some of the elements that were in other community benefits plan, specifically on the business and the procurement aspect of things. I appreciate the employment side and what you're doing there. Believe me, it's greatly appreciated. I guess what I'm asking you to consider doing is stretching in terms of coming up with a metric that's stated ahead of time for business and procurement. At least consider that. But I will say, I believe in being fair, so I want to put this on the record as well. From what I've seen here and read through here, as well as some of the past conversations, the things that you're doing to improve capacity and capability of our small businesses, to include minority and women-owned business enterprises, should ensure a higher probability of success in terms of producing the ultimate results that we're looking for. But again, I come back to, there may be a level of comfort if we at least consider coming up with some objective business and procurement targets for this document. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Just one thing left from me. I've got to say, I think you guys are going to go do all this stuff. I really do. And I should say, I've seen that in your actions. I've seen it even in the conversations we're having when we disagree. We're all trying to work to make this a great community benefit plan. The following up on what Mr. Evans said about the goals for minority and women business enterprises, and I'm thinking back to, does this comport with the law? And it's kind of maybe a two-pronged question. But my concern is, no matter what you do, if there's not a goal, there are going to be some who feel you didn't do enough.
Right. And
I have a sense in my head, and we've talked about those numbers, so I'm not going to throw them out right now, of what those goals ought to look like. So kind of a two-pronged question. One is, the law talks about the benefit oversight committee being able to enforce the plan. Would they, in your mind, is the participation by minority and women businesses an enforceable component of the plan, even though there would not be, or potentially wouldn't be, a goal attached to it? Or is that like, no, we're going to try, but you can't enforce anything there?
I think it's certainly enforceable. There are 11 independent obligations with respect to women and minority-owned business enterprises. The commitment is very substantial. And what I would say, Mr. Hill, is that, as you're aware, the legislation is written that we're supposed to have the greatest possible participation by those segments. And I would say that, with all due respect to Mr. Evans' comment about the necessity for metrics, there are more metrics in this community benefit plan than in any other stadium community benefit plan that exists. So that would be the greatest possible effort that could be made.
Well, Mr. Ventrelli, I think we don't need to get into a semantics argument on that. I don't think I would agree with that. I'm just saying on that particular point, because there aren't goals in the current agreement, is what without a goal, I don't know what adequate performance is and what inadequate performance is, and that's kind of the question.
Well, there are specific obligations with respect to those entities. For example, if we are not holding pre-bid educational seminars for those entities, that hasn't happened. And as Mr. Aguirre laid out, there'd be a mechanism to submit a plan to come into compliance with that and have to do it. So I think each one of those obligations has a different description associated with it. But to imply that they're passive or somehow not genuine obligations, I don't think is a fair or honest reading of the document.
Your interpretation of my implications is inaccurate. How's that? I'm just asking a question. So what I'm saying is, from a result standpoint, if you come in at 18% participation from minority and women businesses, how do we think about that? And how does everybody else in the community think about that? And how are we going to pass that on to the Oversight Committee, which my understanding is really a subset of this committee. Is that correct?
I think the Oversight Committee will not necessarily be a subset of this committee. And by subset, I mean the same members of the committee. It's a creature.
It's a creature
yes.
of the Stadium Authority.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that is correct.
Thanks. So, what if the Oversight Committee comes back and says 18% is not good enough? What would your answer be?
The Oversight Committee's job would be to look at the document with respect to the commitments that are made with respect to those entities and see if we're actually doing those things or not. And
but
if we're
the results that
doing those things...
So the activity leading to an attempt at results would be scrutinized by the committee, but the actual results would not. Is that?
Well, many of those obligations are to provide genuine opportunity, to provide, equal access to things, and to provide equal opportunity there. So if we're not providing that opportunity leading to those results, then certainly a remedy would have to be made there.
Okay. I understand the answer. Mr. DeBerti?
In full respect of everything we've been talking about here all day, and I know we have to do the state law, and I have to agree with everything. That's fine. I'm a little bit, just want to be concerned. I think we're going to have so much construction in this valley unfolding that we should be able to accomplish all of this between all the jobs that seem to be really coming up, and I'm almost as concerned that we're not going to have enough people to complete all these jobs, and I would sure hate to get out in the middle of the Sahara Desert here with this project and find out that we're not completing it because there won't be enough talented people, and I'm talking about engineers and everybody to get all this work done, and I certainly have a lot of respect for Mortensen McCarthy. It's just that the whole group of suppliers up and down the line, I think, is going to be stretched because we've been in a dearth for almost 10 years, and all the good trained people have either retired or haven't been able to get involved. So I'm very sympathetic to everything we're talking about. I'm also semi-worried that if all this breaks loose that we keep hearing about, the Ginting project and et cetera, the Steve Wynn project, the MGM's already doing a project, the Venetian Theater, Colossal Theater in the back. There's just, and there's a plethora of other stuff that's already going on. So I'm all supportive of this. I just want to be aware that we also have a lot of construction that's going to take place right when, and this is a big sophisticated, as a bunch of the others are. So I'm just throwing my 2 cents in that we got a lot on the plate coming up, and I think we should really put all the on the table to look at. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. I want to thank all of you for the effort, and thank you for being here today. I look forward to the next couple of months and continuing to work on all these documents. So, thanks. We'll close agenda item 11 and open agenda item 12 for public comment. Again, if you've already spoken in public comment, that was your opportunity, but if anyone new would like to speak in public comment after the meeting, that would be great. Well, seeing none, I will, Mr. O'Sullivan, you had everybody hopeful there for a minute. Welcome.
Good afternoon. I'll try to make this quick. I know it's been a long afternoon here for everybody.
Sure.
I'm Ken O'Sullivan. I was just hoping to speak to the point on the community benefits. It seems like... I don't think the microphone's working, Mr. O'Sullivan. I'll make it really quick then.
No, we need to find you a
Get a
microphone.
little closer to the page.
Is that, Mr. Washington, is that microphone working?
I think you just need to get closer.
Yes. Wait. Yes, it is.
Oh, okay. You just need to be a little closer.
I'm Ken O'Sullivan, and on the community benefits plan, it seems like everybody's worked exceptionally hard. There's a lot of good faith here. I hope that keeps going. I've also seen a lot of good faith in some very dark hours that the town's had and the country's had in the last 45 days. I've seen a lot of good faith across political parties, and I think that the way that this was initiated on a bipartisan basis where it got support, hopefully that will keep and continue. And I think that the efforts that we've promoted here can be useful for the city, for the state, and going forward. Whether there'll be other stadiums possibly developed on Las Vegas Strip by the other hotels or other new developers coming online. I think that this good faith will keep going forward. I'm optimistic. We've had dark times. I believe that sports are actually something that can provide light and provide more community for the town going forward. We've had the Las Vegas Lights come here. We've had the Stars with the WNBA. I see a lot of positive things with sports, with the developments, knowing where things are going with the community in spite of the hardships that we've had. In addition, the fact that we can get professionals, that we get FIFA soccer here is going to be a really great addition. I'm very supportive of the project and the goals that we've tried to establish here. I also think it's really important that the hotels keep track of what the trends are that people want. The fact that things are being built in a LEED, environmentally sustainable way is things that tourists want when they come here. I think we can showcase our town and the things that we've accomplished, that we're going to accomplish, and the way that we've done it in a progressive manner that's going to make sense both economically and environmentally and in terms of sports. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Sullivan. Mr. Washington?
Stanley Washington, Las Vegas. Calling it like I see it, like I always do. This is a good agreement. It's not complete. A lot of work's been done. Don't want to take my hat off to Mortensen the people who've been working on this, but we still have a little ways to go. I think that you know that in your heart, Mr. Chairman, as you've made your comments relative to what's going on. So we are not operating from a 0 point here on diversity. As we know, MGM has been our diversity leader for some time. Yes, I had a little bit to do with that, but MGM, after recognizing what they were supposed to do, went and become the world's leader in diversity. Am I right, Mr. Hornbuckle? And so the idea that we're talking about reaching 15%, MGM in their sleep does that, okay? So let's get real. 25% needs to be that number at a minimum.
Thank you.
10% of that number needs to be dedicated to the veterans, our veterans who deserve to have first right on this thing, okay? So that whole 15% that Aaron Ford brought to, but he didn't want the legislature to go ahead and make any noise, nonsense. So we already know that 15% doesn't get it. For everybody to be included in 15%, that just doesn't make any sense, you know it. So once again, at a minimum, 25%, MGM normally comes in at 30%. Okay, I deal with them on an ongoing basis. Whatnot. That's commitment. And now, on top of that, I would want Mr. Hornbuckle to go ahead and share with us the concept of how the concept of getting the small minority businesses capacity to build, as in the $50 million that MGM proposed and followed through with Detroit down there because of the fact that they saw not the capacity, so that they needed to go ahead and do something. So I'd like Mr. Hornbuckle to talk about that because that is progressive. So the idea that we're talking about a fund for capacity building, that's nothing new. MGM's already done that, okay? So that's why Bill Hornbuckle was saying, well, look, we're not going to jump all and down behind 15%. And sure enough, this is a good agreement. The 38% is certainly probably the highest, even though Aaron Ford said he was going to bring us 50%. So let's keep it in perspective, with a goal of 75%. So the 38%, though aggressive, not what Aaron Ford told us in Carson City when we were there, Mr. Chairman, 50%, okay, on construction. Now, on the operations side, 55%, okay, we're basically there. So this idea that we're supposed to be jumping up and down behind the 15% and how aggressive the 38% is, yes, but that's still not what the discussion was in Carson City for us not to be bringing it forward at that particular time. Just give me a little history on what was going on. So I also, Mr. Chairman, want to go ahead and thank you for keeping this thing on point in terms of the rules. Obviously, Mr. White does not know the rules. Calling for the question. It's not even on the agenda. He'd be advised to read it, okay? Now, this is this part. Why he's even up there, I don't even know. But you guys got him up there, so you know. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Washington.
Thank you,
Mr. Collins. There's only one opportunity to speak at the meeting. Ms. Parnelli Price.
Really? They're not going to let us? I just wanted to say that it's a shame that in 2017 we have to still have minority participation. I think it's ridiculous. I mean, especially I forgot to talk about my mother. She was actually Sephardic Jew Native American. And it is sad to me that we still have this crap, that you have to have people in a document to hire them. Like Tommy White said, he has people that want to work now. Why do we have to have this crap about what you do for Hispanics, blacks, Asian, women, veterans? Our veterans should be number one. I am so disheartened. Sorry, but as a native Nevadan,
I'm so mad I have to think about these black folks. Oh my God. Oh my God.
That in 2017, we still have to have this in document form. It is terrible. It is disgusting, and you all know that it is disgusting.
Mr. Chairman, when I stayed here earlier, I told you that I was going to stick around because you said that after the program you could talk. Now, here's what I want to say.
Oh, God.
Thank you, but here's what I want to say. This agreement, this community benefit plan that the Raiders have, they have to go back and redo that. Now, what we did, Mr. Chairman, we sent a message to the Raider people and to Mr. Goodell from the NFL. We wanted to have a meeting before we came to this meeting because we knew this community plan would be discussed. So we wanted to sit and talk with them to see exactly what was in it because we were concerned about the historical West Side and North Las Vegas. So we wanted to meet with the Raider family. We wanted to meet with the NFL. And guess what? We have no response as we speak. And so this agreement, and let me thank you for not moving forward with this, because this is not going to work. And I can tell you that, and until they sit down with the stakeholders of the community and sit down and get with us and we can work this out, we have a plan. And so until they do it, we're going to have some problems. And I want to thank you all. And Billy, it's always good to see you, and the rest of you. And Mr. Watson was right. What the job the MGM did, and Billy was a part of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other members of the public, we'll move to agenda item 13 and accept a
Mr.
motion
Chair,
for adjournment.
move for adjournment.
Is there a second? All in favor, please say aye. That is unanimous too.
So I don't think it's appropriate for zoning because I'm being told that this isn't a zoning issue. So why don't we put it on the regular board meeting, not the
That
one
was
in
hilarious.
November, because that meeting is so backed
that
up
was-
already because all these held
that's
items.
gotta be-
the one in December.
That has got to be the most hilariously outrageous meeting I have ever heard. And that includes Oakland City Council meetings. That includes Alameda County Board of Supervisors meetings. That includes NFL owners meetings. That includes, my God, that is hilarious. I have never, ever in my entire life. Well, she was honest, though. I mean, you want to see raw racism of the, gee, I'm not a racist type. You just saw it. That, gee, I'm not a racist, but yeah, the meeting is over. They switched over to a zoning meeting. The meeting was adjourned. That woman who's appeared before, I forgot her name, but she just got up and basically said, I can't believe we have to have minority hiring requirements. They are there for a reason. And not only that, Dan Ventrelli ticket pointed to the real problem overall. Minority hiring requirements are quite common. Excuse me, I was actually tweeting about this, are quite common in California and the Bay Area, as you know, right? But we're talking about Las Vegas and Nevada, where there obviously are not. And here comes this new set of requirements, to that culture. And they don't know what to do with it. We don't want to have to hire these black folks. Oh my God. I mean, that's what she basically said. It's like we have people out there, oh, she cried about it. She absolutely cried about it. I mean, wow. Wow. And to think the Raiders are actually in the middle of this, I don't even like to use the term. I really don't. I really don't like to use the term. I'm looking down because I'm tweeting out my shock over what I just saw. And I can't put it in any other terms than just what I just said, shock. Shameful. That's a shameful display of just of ignorant racism. There's or unconscious racism. There's conscious racism, right? Excuse me. And then there's conscious racism, and then there's unconscious racism. Okay, they're just ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. Okay. Oh, by the way, for those of you wondering, the Fortress plan for financing for the stadium was because Oakland Mayor Libby Schaaf said she didn't want taxpayer money involved. There was no county, there was no backstop. So, unlike the deal for the Oakland Raiders Las Vegas Stadium, all right, which has Clark County as a backstop, there's no such backstop in the Oakland parlance. And the reason why is because the revenue take and for the bonds was spread over a larger development area. Oops, excuse me. Sorry about that. Anyway, as I was saying, hold on, I'm trying to untangle some things here. Anyway, the revenue take for the bonds, I'm trying to put this back together. Okay, the revenue take for the bonds was spread over a 108-acre development area, hence the offices. Coliseum City provided that. The Raiders project doesn't have that. And it had the opportunity to have that when the tax increment district was proposed as part of the original draft of SB1 in Nevada, right? But because Mr. Adelson was involved and was willing to write a check, that was taken out because there was concern about tax increment money being drawn, taking away from the public coffers, and so on, all right? So, but in the Oakland context, those bond issues were not designed to be tax exempt in as are the Clark County ones. Again, the city of Oakland and Alameda County were not called on in the Fortress case to be the backstop. So the only way you could have a tax exempt bond issue is to have that, okay? The way you have a better interest rate is to have a more robust revenue stream. And so the Raiders project in Oakland has a far more robust revenue stream because it's spread over a larger development area, all right? So, so anybody who says otherwise, just as usual, is completely out to lunch. Just period, okay? So I'm going to note that in a separate video and to get that out of the way, but I just want people to know that. I'm going to take some of your comments because some of them I don't want to repeat here, but John Marks is right. He says, I can't believe the Las Vegas Sports Authority is that stupid. And as a whole, in fairness to the Stadium Authority, not Sports Authority, Stephen Hill has a tough job, and he has to quite literally play ringleader, as it were. And I could more, I don't mean to sound, for this to sound as a pejorative, but he actually has to play more like lion tamer or zookeeper, okay? Because given what I saw just then, that snippet that I'm going to break out into a separate video, wow, I mean, we got to be kidding me, man. That was racist. That was obvious racism still existing. I mean, straight up, okay? And or as Malcontent said in this comment, we can hire them, we just don't want to see them. That's basically what she said, you know? We have to have these numbers and we have to have these goals and wow. I mean, wow. Boss said it well. He says, racists are generally honest except Democrats. Ding. Boy, oh boy. Someone says, Malcontent says, I need to be there in December. I'm doing fine over here, okay? I gotta get ready for, look, I'm going to CES in Las Vegas in January. I'm preparing for that. I've got a lot more tech stuff to deal with, okay, to put out. But, you know, between Tommy White's really ill-advised attempt to ram through the community benefits package, I thought that was an awful show. Between Tommy White and that person, they just set up a really awful look for this project as a whole. And the Raiders, for the Raiders to be for the Raiders to be in the middle of this, they ought to be ashamed. They really ought to be ashamed that they are at the center of this. And it's horrible. It's horrible. Robert Bakerfield says, I knew this was too good to be true. Laugh out loud. Can't remember another stadium deal with this many issues. Only the Raiders. Yeah, I mean, it's got a huge number of issues. And Malcolmson says, just establish a numerical standard and write it down. If you don't, guys like, quote, Tommy, unquote, won't go out of their way to meet your hopeful goals. It's like using the word reasonable in a contract. Yeah, well, but what they're asking for in terms of numbers, Oakland achieved it at 25%. So Dan Ventrelli's saying that at 15% they're going to have goals that are better than any other stadium in NFL history. He needs to look at the history of the Raider project that was done to bring the silver and black from Los Angeles back to Oakland where they belong. So he's completely wrong. Absolutely wrong. And, oh boy. And it was nice to see Stanley Washington say something, because I've called Stanley now 3 times. He hasn't called me back. And I thought maybe it was somebody telling him, hey, you know, we've seen you on video twice. Stop talking to Zinni or else. I mean, what else can I glean from a person who would routinely call me back, right? So Alessandro says, if it's more economic in business sense to stay in, Oakland as opposed to go to Vegas. What is Mark Davis thinking? Vegas is a disaster. What are we missing here? I just don't get it. And we're right there with you. There is some politics, some heavy politics driving this thing. And I think we're seeing it. You know, I say this before, and I'll say it again. If you are confused, you're trying to figure out what's going on, just look at what's in front of you. First of all, we got Tommy White pushing this agenda with Steve Sisolak. And they're really driving this. And it's almost like they feel like in some kind of way they're acting like they got the Raiders under a barrel. And the Raiders seem like they can't quite figure out a way to get out of it. That's what I read right up front. That the Raiders are trying to figure out a way to get out of it, and they can't quite do it. Because look at who has been driving the messaging. You have Steve Sisolak on social media driving the messaging regarding everything from the tax rate, or excuse me, not the tax rate, but the tax revenues, and then saying, oh, it's over projections and everything else. And it turns out it's not, which puts those guys in the bind on the Stadium Authority staff. And then if it's not Sisolak, then it's Tommy White saying, okay, well, the groundbreaking is going to be on November 13th. And he's just the union guy, okay? Leaving the Raiders in the lurch to, you know, they have to actually hurry up to do the groundbreaking. So, you know, I can see Bedain like, I've got to do this, I've got to do this, I've got to do this if we want to get to where we want to. And then at the same time, he's got his boss, Mark Davis, saying, get it done, get it done, get it done. So Mark Davis is driving this, on the one hand, for his own reasons that have to do with the ego of trying to prove he can do something that people say he can't do. Look, that's what this is about, and this is what it has been about. And then you've got him paired with some people in Las Vegas who have their own interests. Steve Sisolak running for governor, Tommy White, you know, as a union guy, you know, trying to get work for people, trying to burnish his own credentials and whatever else he's got going on. It's not hard to figure out. That's it. And the NFL's like, whoa, let's see what happens here, okay? Does that mean the commissioner won't show up? No, because if, you know, Mark Davis is an owner of an NFL stadium, and for the commissioner not to show up to the groundbreaking would make the owner, in my view, look very bad. So I expect Commissioner Goodell to be there, period. That doesn't mean the thing's going to fly, okay? That doesn't mean there aren't going to be problems. But I will tell you this, that stadium as an effort will survive with or without the Raiders because of UNLV. Because in all this talk, all this crying, all this yada, yada, yada BS, there's a simple fact that we still don't have any measurable report of true progress on a joint use agreement between UNLV and the Raiders. Jeremy Aguila said they're going to, quote, circle back, unquote, on Monday, which means he doesn't know anything. Or if he does know something, he's not comfortable presenting it. It's taken that a long, long time. So, and then you've got this tickering drop dead date, okay? And I get the impression that the Raiders would actually be relieved to get out of this situation. I'm really starting to get that impression. Just saying, all right? And yeah, as Crawford says, just stay, baby. And he says the NFL and owners minus Jerry Jones need to sit Mark and Dean Spanos to an event and give them a come to Jesus talk. Yeah, I agree with you. I completely agree. This whole effort based on the Clippers being sold to Steve Ballmer for $2 billion, just really needs to just be a stop and say, you know what, let's hold on a second, all right? Alessandro said it should be about a good business decision for longevity, not ego and bad deals. Unreal, Mark Davis. And Mr. Burksfield says they announced the groundbreaking on Sunday night during the game, shaking my head. If they only knew what was going on, hashtag saving face. Actually, the groundbreaking was announced before that. It was announced 2 weeks before that in an article by the Las Vegas, not the Las Vegas Review-Journal, but another organization. And it came out by Tommy. First of all, it was reported by one person, and then Tommy White came out and said, yeah, we're doing it, not the Raiders. And then Sisolak, then someone else said it was going to happen. And then it took another week for Sisolak to come out and say it was going to happen. And then finally, after all this jazz, the Raiders finally came out and said, yeah, we're going to do it. What that says to me right off the bat is, first of all, this. I've said it before. I'll say it again. The developer is supposed to drive the messaging on groundbreakings, period. I don't care what anybody else tells you. That's the way it's supposed to be done, okay? Period. When you have that kind of jazz going on, and it means the developer, someone's grabbing the developer and pulling them along like that, and the developer's like, oh my God, the developer's Raiders. They're like, what do we do? Okay, let's do it on this. Let's rush and put this together. So now they're rushed, okay? You got Badane quite literally jumping through this hoop, and he's got jumping through that hoop. There's an old saying, be careful what you ask for. You may often get it. And right now, the Raiders are in a situation where I don't really believe they completely understood the ramifications of what they were asking for in wanting an NFL stadium in Las Vegas. So, Crawford says, Barnum and Bailey needs to be the master of ceremonies. Yeah. Hey, folks, this is over. I'll be back later with, I've got to get ready. It's 7:09 here in the East. 11 o'clock Eastern, 8 o'clock in the Pacific. I'm going to have my friend on, AP Stedham. I'll announce it. We're going to talk SEC football. He covers the Alabama Crimson Tide and has for a long time. He's the expert. He says that Auburn is going to beat Georgia this weekend on Saturday. So let's talk about why Georgia is #1 and why Auburn might just beat them. His point of view. He's the expert. AP Stedham. Be back here. You bet your last money. Our conversation with SEC football expert AP Stedham, and longtime friend of mine covering the NFL draft for what, 15 years, something like that? Well, whatever, 2005. Yeah, since 2005. That man, 2005, 2015, 10 years. Okay, 12 years. All right. Right here. 11 o'clock Eastern, 8 o'clock Pacific. I'll see you guys. Thank you for hanging out. And boy, what a blankety blank show. Oh my Lord. I'll see you all later.